Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the ESG for Climate Action's International Conference 2023, Day 2, hosted by World Green Organization in partnership with UNSGAP, Cyberport, FSDC, Hong Kong Exchange, and IFRS. It is our great pleasure to have you all in the conference right here and joining us today. I am your MC, Eunice. I am now pleased to announce ESG for Climate Action's International Conference 2023 Day 2 now begins. We are living in a world that no country or city where the climate impact cannot be seen and felt. The world is now clearly affected by increasing temperature, ambient temperature fluctuations, variations in precipitation, droughts, and flooding, coupled with the frequent extreme weather incidents. To tackle climate change and help stakeholders to develop and review climate actions, WGO, in partnership with UNSGAP, Cyberport, Hong Kong Exchange, FSDC, and IFRS, organizes this conference aiming to introduce latest international sustainability standards and innovative business models to enhance the sustainability reporting and disclosure quality, identify best practices for environmental, social, and governance, ESG, integration, and risk management. Develop a common understanding of the latest trends, successes, and challenges with corresponding climate actions. Demonstrate successful circular economy model, low carbon technologies, and showcase carbon neutrality, carbon trading, and assets management. Today, we are pleased to have renowned experts from around the world to share their successful experience. Now, before we start off with our packed program of Day 2, I'd like to welcome Dr. William Yu, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, World Green Organization, WGO, to the stage for a welcoming remark. Let's welcome Dr. Yu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Day 2 of this important conference. And it's an absolute privilege and a distinct honor to address this gathering of distinguished global representatives from diverse sectors. We are extremely pleased to collaborate once again with UNESCO to orchestrate the 4th conference on ESG for climate actions. We are also privileged to have the partnership of the Financial Service Development Council and the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Cyberport, who have graciously consented to act as our official conference partners. So yesterday, I touched upon the tipping points, specifically the proposal of a new type of tipping points, namely risk tipping points. The way we used to manage risk may soon no longer apply because of human-induced climate change. Risk tipping points occurred when existing socio-ecological system is no longer able to buffer risk and provide its expected functions. After this, the risk of catastrophe impacts to this system increased dramatically. So today I would like to deep dive into the realm of green finance and sustainable investment. So to the fund managers attending our conference, you may agree that the current challenges lies in finding suitable and effective strategies to integrate the analysis and assessment of climate-related risks and opportunities into your investment management process. So it's crucial to explore how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions within our portfolio. However, the assessment of the financed emission is a complex task, particularly for the asset class outside of equities and corporate bonds. We need to consider how we can influence investment strategies across the board, from the individual investor to corporations and family office. My observation is to strive for cross-disciplinary collaboration to achieve the paradigm shift. As an advisor to several accounting firms on sustainability and ESG rating and investment ban on carbon asset management, I believe efficient carbon asset management is crucial for reducing carbon resource input and emissions. More than just examining indicators like carbon fund turnover ratio or carbon emission rate, we need to embrace the reality of the situation. We really need a cross-disciplinary expert to collaborate and bring projects to completion. I can give you an example. In managing a forestation project to generate carbon credits, we need biodiversity expert to advise on specific locations with appropriate temperatures and humidity for species re-establishment. So then followed by the policy people who are familiar with forestry regulations and government policy in order to obtain the planting land and license. We then need business people to deal with the timber sales, followed by GIS, IoT expert to measure the carbon absorption rates using drones or satellite image. So not forgetting academics and carbon expert to work on the formulas based on biomass and tree heights. So finally, we need finance professionals to figure out all these IRR, NPV cash flow for the project with a pending period for many years. So the story doesn't end here. We need third-party certification and trading platforms to actualize the real value of carbon assets. So in the context of Hong Kong, increasing our valuation in carbon asset management should be a value-added certification process. How we can facilitate, for example, CCER generated in mainland China to be traded internationally while working with different standards, adhering to principles like CDM, VSC, or gold standard, or others. So Hong Kong should leverage its professionalism, integrity, and unique position, bridging Eastern and Western perspective to promote the development of carbon asset and management and carbon trading. But policy and green finance alone are not enough. So as you may remember, the CEO of BlackRock mentioned before, the next 1,000 unicorns, companies with market valuation exceeding $1 billion, will not be the next search engine, the next big media company. Rather, it will be likely emerge from climate technology. Green hydrogen, green cement, green steel, green agriculture could be the next frontier. So if you are passionate about preserving our planet and making a profit, join us in bringing climate tech, low carbon tech, and innovative sustainable finance instrument to Hong Kong and to the world. So this isn't just another conference. It's a value-added platform bringing together cross-disciplinary expertise to drive change. So together, let's make a difference. Thank you.
Such a heartwarming welcome. Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. Next, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sangmin Nam, Director, Environmental and Development Division, United Nations ESG, to the stage for his welcoming remark. Let's welcome Dr. Sangmin Nam.
Good morning, distinguished speakers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday, I had the honor of delivering an opening remarks at this conference. And today, I am privileged to address you once again. Yesterday, I emphasized the growing commitments of both developed and developing countries to net zero. As governments globally recognize the necessity of transitioning to net zero state, they also see its potential to transform their economy and to maintain or increase competitiveness in evolving low-carbon economy. To this end, the corporations must align their business operations with a net zero economy, ensuring their climate action remains consistent and genuine. I also stressed the importance of business actively participating in international and regional partnership to foster collaboration, share best practices, and innovate collectively. Today, I would like to reflect on some observations from our previous session. A key discussion point central to the Paris Agreement is that of climate finance. One clear consensus is the duty of developed countries to uphold their climate finance commitments, providing 100 billion annually, and increasing transparency in their climate finance providing to developing countries. The Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan adopted at COP27 last year underlines the necessity of investing $4 trillion in renewable energy by 2030 and additional $4 to $6 billion annually in transiting to low-carbon economy. This underscores the call for developed nations to deliver their promise on climate finance. And the Global Landscape Climate Finance Report estimated that current annual climate finance flow of $653 billion in 2020 and about $900 billion in 2021. These are equally shared by private and public sector. And about 76% of those funds, financial flow, is raised domestically. In East Asia, particularly dominated by China, 93% of climate finance comes from domestic source. These figures underscore the urgent need for developing countries to advance their domestic climate finance systems and formulate policies to foster private finance mobilization. So even if developed countries fully deliver their promise, the scale of finance is nowhere near the required climate finance in developing countries. Thus, domestic resource mobilization is critical to climate finance in both developed and developing countries. In this respect, I would like to highlight the role of Hong Kong finance sector and then Hong Kong SAR government. Yesterday, several speakers underscored the advancement in Hong Kong's finance sector. The equity market now has a capitalization exceeding $30 trillion. Over 200 SFC authorized ESG funds collectively represent more than $150 billion. In 2022 alone, the volume of green and sustainable bonds issued in Hong Kong constituted about 35% of Asian market, amounting to $80 billion. So such progress in Hong Kong did not occur in isolation. While we must acknowledge the rich history and success of Hong Kong's finance sector, the Hong Kong SAR government and associated financial bodies have effectively established a conducive environment for green financing initiative. In this regard, Hong Kong can offer invaluable insights to Asia-Pacific countries, guiding them in establishing a conducive environment for climate finance. Our collective vision of attaining net zero emission by mid-century won't align with a 1.5-degree pathway unless we achieve a substantial emission reduction in next 10 years. I therefore urge the financial sector and Hong Kong government to actively share their expertise, knowledge with numerous developing countries seeking effective financing solutions. I hope these suggestions serve to enhance dialogue today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sangmin Nam. Thank you. Next is our officiating guest, Dr. George Lam, BBS JP Chairman, United Nations SGAP Sustainable Business Network, ESBN. Dr. George Lam is the chair of UN SGAP Sustainable Business Network. He holds a prominent position in advancing sustainable business practices in the Asia-Pacific region. He will join us online to give us a keynote speech. Please put our hands together to welcome Dr. George Lam.
Distinguished participants and sustainability champions, it is indeed my pleasure to join all of you here in Hong Kong today for the 2023 ESG for Climate Action International Conference to mobilize the private sector for more and faster contributions towards achieving the green transformation of the Asia-Pacific region. The private sector is of critical importance because it has abundant resources in terms of green finance and innovation and technology. As we all know, the 2030 sustainability agenda is totally off track, and the key to the next steps is to win the climate crisis battle right here in the Asia-Pacific region. The region is already the largest and fastest growing economy of the world, and also its most polluting region, now already accountable for more than half of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. We need a smooth transition to the green economy, and that takes green finance and innovation solutions. This is where Hong Kong can help. Being the international innovation and technology hub, being the green tech and fintech hub of the region, and also the center of excellence for ESG investing, Hong Kong can promote and facilitate more ESG capital allocations to more green projects throughout the region. And also our vibrant ecosystem for entrepreneurs can help as well. We already have more than 5,000 startups in Hong Kong, including many green tech and fintech startups. And these entrepreneurs can work together with their fellow entrepreneurs throughout the region for smarter solutions towards green transformation. And finally, Hong Kong is seeing exciting developments in terms of the convergence of green finance and green tech. And this is the key to success in terms of a faster, more cost-effective, and also more effective green transformation for the region. I wish all of you a pleasant and impactful conference ahead, and also good health, and let's work together towards a sustainable and inclusive future for all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lam, and we do look forward to meeting Dr. Lam in person next year. Joining us next on the stage, please welcome Mr. Albert Wong, founder and president of World Green Organization, co-chairman of ASEAN Economic Club, former chair of UN SGAP ESBN Green Economy Task Force, to give us a keynote speech. Please welcome Mr. Albert Wong.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and friends, welcome to the fourth ESG for Climate Action International Conference at the Hong Kong Cyberport. It is truly an honor to stand before such a diverse and visionary audience representing different sectors and generations who have gathered here with a shared purpose to address the pressing challenges of our time and pave the way for a sustainable, green, and happy future. In our world today, we often find ourselves caught up in a cycle of taking without giving back. We must recognize that we are in a give and take situation where effective solutions are needed to address multiple social, economic, and environmental issues. A holistic approach that integrates innovative technologies can help us combat future challenges and create a master plan for a better world. This year's theme truly reflected and addressed our concerns. The purpose of cooperation, achieving a success in the emergence of climate change challenges, new standards and regulations. At this pivotal moment, we stand at a crossroads. The urgency of the climate crisis demands immediate and meaningful action. It is no longer enough to simply acknowledge the problem we face. We must embrace the available solution and take bold actions, bold steps towards their implementation for the benefit for all stakeholders. But amidst the challenges, there is hope. Solutions exist, waiting to be harnessed and applied. We stand on the precipice of a new era where visionary leaders can inspire and guide others towards effective and innovative plans. Today, we have gathered with a shared vision and purpose to drive our world towards enduring peace, prosperity, and inclusive growth. We stand at a critical juncture in history where the post-pandemic era presents us with an opportunity to create a strong economic revival while addressing pressing climate challenge. To achieve this, we must adopt a holistic approach that goes beyond mere principles and awakens a sense of green empowerment within us all. We need to provide integrated solutions that not only combat climate change, but also serve as a high purpose. These solutions must be commercially viable, unlocking the potential for economic prosperity while safeguarding lives and addressing inequalities within our communities. In 2022, the UN Asia-Pacific Green Deal and the ASEAN Green Deal were launched. Noted in values that resonate deeply with Asian cultures, where life is respected above mere economic gains. These policy frameworks provide aggressive, commercially viable solutions to combat climate change and address the consequences of extreme weather events and human malpractices. However, as we navigate this transformative era, we must recognize that a new world order is emerging, characterized by multipolarization. This new order seeks to foster goodness and justice through global standards and measurements, driven by the vital implementation of ESG initiatives and the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Let us not forget the valuable lesson from history. In 1990s, two remarkable individuals, Nelson Mandela, who is the former president of South Africa, and Mr. Helmut Schmidt, former chancellor of West Germany. They proposed the inclusion of responsibility in the Human Rights Charter to the United Nations. Their visionary idea aimed to emphasize the inseparable nature of rights and responsibilities. Recognizing that both are crucial for building a better world, though their proposal was turned down at that time, we must remember the importance of combining rights and responsibilities. For true change to occur and for our world to become a safe and livable place, we must strive for a balanced approach. The principles of sustainability encompassing environment, social, and governance, which is ESG factors, as well as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, require a solid foundation of rights and responsibilities. Without a true world order where individuals and institutions uphold their responsibilities along their rights, these frameworks cannot function effectively. Let us draw inspiration from the visionaries who have come before us, like Nelson Mandela and Helmut Smith, who recognized the need for his holistic approach to shaping our world by embracing the interconnectedness of rights and responsibility. We can forge a path towards lasting change. Together, let us work towards a future where rights and responsibilities are not separate entities, but are united, empowering us to create a world that is just, sustainable, and inclusive for all. Thank you, and I wish you all a fruitful and inspiring conference.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Dr. Albert Wong to remain on stage. Mr. Albert Wong, please remain on stage as we are going to have the kickoff ceremony right now. And of course, with Mr. Wong, I'd like to invite also our other officiating guests on stage for this kickoff ceremony. Let's invite Dr. Sangmin Nam, Director, Environmental and Development Division, United Nations, ESGAP. And next, we have Ms. Hitomi Rankine, Environmental Affairs Officer, United Nations ESGAP. And I'd like to also invite Mr. Daniel R. Fung, SBS Vice Chairman, Financial Services Development Council, FSDC. Mr. Walter van Hattum, First Counselor, Head of Trade and Economic. And Mr. Van Binh Dam, Consul General of SR, Vietnam, Hong Kong, SAR. Mr. Miguel Aguirre de Casa, Consulate General of Spain. Dr. William Yu, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, World Green Organization, WGO. And we have Mr. Albert Wong, of course, on stage with us, founder and president of World Green Organization, co-chairman of ASEAN Economic Club, former chair of UNSGAP, ESBN Green Economic Task Force. And for Mr. Pham, Consul General of SR Vietnam, Hong Kong, SAR, who has been exceptionally supportive of our event, will not be able to join us today, but he has extended his heartfelt apologies for not being able to attend. But we also thank him for supporting us. And now we should be ready for our first photo. Hold on to the props, hold it in your hand, and we'll take this first photo. And keep your smile. And for our next picture, what we'll do is on a count of three, we'll place the card on the board. Yes, on the count of three. Let's do that together. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Woo! Congratulations! Let's start off a wonderful day today at this conference. Okay, please remain on stage. We will take more pictures. We'd like to invite our sponsors who's been supportive to our program today. Firstly, Honorary Diamond, Crystal International Group Limited, and Double Diamond sponsors, King's Flare Development Limited, Sun Life Hong Kong Limited, Supreme Platinum sponsor, BOC Group Life Assurance Company Limited, A4CR, and also our double platinum sponsors, CS Tech Solution Limited, X0 Infinity International Company Limited, Global Leaders Corporation, and Greater Bay Area Sustainability Institute. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Hong Kong and China Gas Company Limited, Town Gas, Negawatt Technology Limited, Worldwide Envision Center. Our platinum sponsors, BDO Hong Kong, Power Assets Holdings Limited. Silver sponsors, Guangdong Junping Law Firm, International Chamber of Sustainable Development. Bronze sponsors, EcoSmart and Riskery Consultancy Limited. Thank you very much, sponsors, for supporting us and make us a successful conference, our 2-day conference. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. And here we go. We're ready for our photo. And look at our cameraman right there. And give us the big smile. Cheese. Thank you so much, everyone. Please be seated. Thank you. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's move on to our next session, which is our first sharing session. As we all know, ESG has been a hot topic recently. In light of the increasing demand for ethical and sustainable approaches in the corporate world, it's time to explore the multifaceted concept of ESG and its impact on businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, and also our online supporters, our next speaker is Mr. Michael Liechti, representing Mr. Sergio Diaz to share with us the topic ESG and business conduct risk. Michael joined RepRisk in 2020 and is part of the business development team for APAC. Before joining RepRisk, Michael worked at Credit Suisse for more than 11 years. He is a certified international investment analyst and certified ESG analyst. Hi, Michael, are you ready? Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, good morning. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining this session today about measuring and evaluating ESG risk. So in the next 15 minutes, I want to talk about the current challenges when it comes to ESG, also give you a little introduction to RepRisk, and in the end also speak about the important topics such as biodiversity and greenwashing. So what are the root causes for the current challenges with ESG data? There are a number of different causes, including the issues outlined on this slide. So you can see the first one is the lack of use case and an aggregate confusion with ESG ratings. There is self-disclosed data which can mask material risks, and changing methodologies which makes it difficult or impossible for you as an investor to actually understand the underlying data. And lastly, the lack of timeliness and coverage. That means that you still have to do your own research, and then you're often left in the dark. So solutions to those challenges are that we need a clear understanding of the purpose the data serves. We also need alternative data, transparent methodologies, and use of technology, which are key to advance. Further, understanding ESG risk is also important for addressing double materiality. As we know, ESG rating agencies generally aim to evaluate the impact of the environment and society on a company's own financial performance. So, for example, whether there is enough water near a company's factory to support their water-dependent operations. But RepRisk, on the other hand, to stick with the example, we actually check, whether that same company, water-dependent operation, pollute the water supply for local communities and wildlife, which, as you know, can lead to reputational damage, violation of local or international laws, and also ultimately fines. So you really have both with RepRisk. You have the financial materiality aspect and the environmental and social materiality aspect covered. Allow me to introduce RepRisk over the next slides so that you actually know where we come from, how we differ, and who we work with within the industry. So RepRisk, we do specialize in ESG business conduct risk, and you can also quantify that risk. We are a Swiss company. We initially were serving the financial sector in Switzerland, and in 2006 UBS came to us with a list of 100 companies and asked us to do the assessment of those 100 companies. Fast forward today, it's the world's largest and most comprehensive database on ESG risk, and we do serve more than 550 clients and 40 partners globally. What are those clients? So because we started serving the financial sector, we still have a heavy tilt towards it. So you can see 90 plus of the world's leading banks, they actually rely on our data during their due diligence or KYC processes. But more and more of the demand is coming from the investment space. So also 20 of the 25 largest investment managers are trusting us during their investment processes. We also do work with the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, which integrated our data into their portfolio. We also work with some index providers such as S&P Dow Jones Indices, Sustainable One, and FTSE for Good, which all have integrated our data into their methodologies as well, both for monitoring the issuers, but also for starting a potential divestment process or exclusion process of the index. And we also work with the UN agencies, and we have integrated the UNGC principles in our database, and SASB also used our data as a key input when developing their own framework. Now, how do we differ in the market? And you probably figured already the first point you can see on the slide that everything we do is about risk, right? So we really look at ESG through the risk lens, and we want to make the risk transparent for you as investors. And we do that with an outside-in perspective. So that means we on purpose exclude company disclosed information, and we collect what is the world saying about the company and not what is the company saying about itself. So it's really a reality check if a company is walking the talk. We have daily updated research since we started with the database in January 2007, and we can do so because we have this unique combination of both artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So artificial intelligence helps us with the speed of capturing the data, machine learning with structuring the data, and then the human analysts are really what makes the data meaningful, right? Which are curating the data further and which are really checking if everything is correct before it's being added to the database. And we are the only provider which covers both emerging frontier markets, public and private companies, but also infrastructure projects such as dams, ports, mines, factories, and plantations. On this slide, it kind of all comes together we talked about. So you see on top, you see the research inputs, and below you see the outputs. If we start with the research inputs on the left-hand side, you see we really do have that history over 16 years. And in that time, our analysts were able to label over 8 million documents. We screen over 500,000 documents every day from over 100,000 public sources. We conduct this screening in 23 major business languages. So both our natural language processing, but also our analysts are speaking those languages. And as mentioned, you can see we have at the moment a bit more than 150 analysts, and they are based around the globe. So they are based in Toronto, Berlin, Zurich, and Manila to really ensure that they can work on the database 24/7. In terms of outputs, we have a bit more than 600,000 entities in our database. Majority of it are private companies. And you see out of those, 245,000 actually have had at least one risk incident since 2007. And also 71,000 infrastructure projects have been linked to at least one incident since 2007. And as mentioned, across all sectors, all countries. And this data is, of course, also mapped to different factors, such as the UNGC, SASB, and SDGs as well. It's really important that the word coverage doesn't exist at Rapis, right? That you understand that because it's incident-driven, it's issue-driven. So we look for the issue first, and then in a second step, which company has been involved. And that is why any company or project can be captured under our methodology. Next thing I wanted to highlight today is biodiversity. So with the recent launch of TNFD, biodiversity is really becoming more prominent also in the financial space, and TNFD is already encouraging data providers to swing into action and increase transparency as we have all seen in new collaborations of different data providers and financial institutions around this topic. So at RepRisk, we teamed up with IBAT. IBAT manages the world's most authoritative biodiversity data set to bring data together in a way that generates meaningful insights. So with IBAT geographic information and with RepRisk incident data, you actually can see, okay, what is the proximity of the project I'm looking at to a key biodiversity area, and also what are the typical issues linked to that project, and not only to the project, but also to the owner or operator of the project. And then you would also be able to see if the owner or operator also owns another project in a different country across the globe. And you would really be able to understand, okay, what is the risk of the company, of the project, but also what is the proximity to this project I'm looking at in the extractive sector. Unsurprisingly for us, proximity does matter, right? So we created a recent white paper based on our data together with IBAT that shows that the proximity of extractive projects to biodiversity sensitive sites is linked to more environmental risk incidents. So projects located within 1 kilometer, they experience 30% more environmental risk incidents, and companies that own or operate those projects are also exposed to risk. So on the private side, private companies, they experience 27% more risk incidents for projects within the 1 kilometer range, while public companies experience around 70% more. Lastly, certain environmentally sensitive sites are also associated with even higher risk, and those are sites such as the UNESCO World Heritage Sites and Alliance for Zero Extinction sites. And if you're interested more in reading about this white paper and about this topic, it can all be found on RepRisk website. For the last 5 minutes, let's have a look at greenwashing, and very important topic as well. So what is greenwashing? Quick repetition, it basically misleads consumers and stakeholders to view a company's environmental footprint in a more positive light. So this type of misinformation and minimization of ESG risk, they pose a threat not only to the credibility of the company, right, but also to us, to our collective ability to transition to a greener, to a more sustainable future. Of course, regulation is stepping in, but investors today, they still need to do significant research, like reading the fine print and really assessing actions to determine the truth behind sustainability claims of companies. And we at RepRisk, we really want to help you identifying the meaningful data, right? So that you can see, okay, what is the actual behavior, what is the company actually doing, and not only saying. So we bring that information on adverse ESG incidents and business conduct to light in an actionable way. And we are getting this information not only like on the global level from big outlets, we are also getting it from the local level at an early stage. So that helps you to be informed early on, to act early on about your own exposure to ESG issues, which can support engagement, impact, and risk mitigation strategies. So this outside-in perspective is very effective to circumvent greenwashing, as said, by capturing the impact of a company rather than only its messaging, and it really helps you with making better investment decisions and move the world toward a more sustainable capital allocation. With our data set back to 2007, we were uniquely positioned to also look at the evolution of issues in the industry in the past. So we reviewed actually the past 10 years of data from 2012 to 2022 linked to greenwashing, and we did indeed observe an increase in the number of such incidents and the shift in the regions, topics, and sectors involved, as you can see on the slide. And the increase in regulatory initiatives is holding companies much more accountable, right? And the scrutiny is reflected in public, as the companies are now also being called out if they do not act in line with their own commitments. And that is essentially what you're able to see in our database. So through analyzing our data also from the last 2 years, approximately 1 of every 5 climate-related ESG incident was also linked to misleading communication, so greenwashing. and lobbying and offsetting were the ones identified as two of the major contributors, right? And it's no longer just industries as oil or banking that face increasing pressure. It's also the retail and personal and household goods sectors, which were responsible for around 10% of greenwashing risk incidents in 2021. Same as with biodiversity, if you're interested in finding more details or reading more details about greenwashing, about our greenwashing report, you can find that on our website as well. Lastly, I wanted to highlight some examples from our data. So another common and complex theme in climate greenwashing is the use of offsets, which provides an economic means of compensating in one area by making up for it in another, and it is often related to emissions today. So we reviewed a sample of incidents linked to both carbon offsetting and also misleading communication over the past 5 years. And on this slide, you see some samples to shed light on how those risks actually relate to climate compensation for different sectors. So for example, we have the banking and financial services sectors where financiers of carbon offset projects were criticized for eviction of local communities to acquire land for forest plantation. Another example is from the food and beverage sector, where a fast food company was accused of using ineffective tree planting to compensate their own emissions. And lastly, you also have the oil and gas sector, which a fuel supplier was accused of buying carbon credits to overstate impacts on climate and avoid paying carbon taxes. Thank you for your attention this morning, and wish you a great rest of the conference today.
Thank you to you too, Michael. Thank you so much. Having explored the concept of ESG and business conduct risk, let's now shift our focus towards the broader theme of sustainability. Our next speaker, Mr. Constant van Aerschot, Director Asia Pacific, Accounting for Sustainability, A4S, will share with us on the topic, Accounting for Sustainability. Mr. Constant van Aerschot leads the Asia Pacific chapter of A4S CFO Leadership Network, promoting sustainable business practices with extensive industry experience. He has previously worked with Lafarge and Alcatel. Constant holds an MSc in Civil Engineering, an MBA, and a diploma in directorship. So here we go, Mr. Constant van Aerschot. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Great conference so far. Very interesting contributors, and thank you very much for having me. So I will be talking about the role of CFOs and accountants in climate actions. First, a quick overview of what A4S is, because I think not everyone will know about us. So A4S is a charity established in the UK in 2004 by His Majesty King Charles III when he was the Prince of Wales. So we are almost 20 years old. And our mission from the beginning was to inspire action by finance leaders to drive a fundamental shift towards resilient business models and a sustainable economy. So our target audience is mainly finance and accounting community to transform financial decision-making to reflect the opportunities and risks posed by the climate crisis and other issues. So we run several networks. One is a CFO leadership network, so basically the corporate CFO. We run an accounting bodies network. We have 17 accounting bodies in our network, and the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants is one of the 17. So through this network, we reach about 2/3 of all the accountants in the world. We also run an asset owners network, mainly pension funds, because they have a lot of funds to invest, and their decisions are critical when it comes to climate change. We also have an academy and a circle of practice. Good thing is about a charity is that we publish most of the material that we produce. So you can see here on the screen what we call the essential guides. All of them can be downloaded from our website. So it's in 4 buckets. We categorize these in 4 buckets. How should finance lead the way? What is the strategic response to macro sustainability trends from a financial and accounting perspective? Then is how do companies transform their decisions? How to integrate sustainability into financial decision making? And here, one guide that is very popular is a CapEx guide. So how to embed ESG in capital investment appraisals, processes. Then, of course, is measuring what matters. Is about natural capital accounting, social capital accounting, and then the valuation of a company when it comes to climate change. And the fourth one is, of course, access to finance. Is how CFOs and companies can have reduced cost of capital when it comes to raising funds. So these are all the guides that can be downloaded. So my topic today is, why should CFOs care about climate and ESG today? And we have seen it from a previous speaker as well that, climate change is becoming a big risk, a tangible risk, a physical risk with, extreme weather events, stranded assets, and so forth. So we can categorize those risks into 2 sectors. One is a physical risk of your assets, and the other one is a transition risk. Is how do I transition my portfolio from a high carbon footprint, for example, to a low carbon footprint? So those are the 2 categories that actually finance and CFOs should look at. And we see a great acceleration of the need for reporting, for ESG reporting, and probably most of you know about this. But nowadays, 95% of institutional investors are looking for ESG information. And they're looking for it because they want to eventually divest from companies with poor ESG records. And we can see this quite clearly in the reporting frameworks, and most of you know about all this. You have the reporting frameworks, the principle-based goal, the global goals, indices, and a very rapid acceleration of regulations all over the world on taxonomy, on different regulatory frameworks. We also see a consolidation of, which is good news, of all those, the standards. So on the bottom right, you have the integrated reporting that is actually a spin-off from A4S. So we created integrated reporting 15 years ago. And so there is a consolidation with SASB, value reporting, and now IFRS is actually taking the lead with the ISSB. But most of you probably know that. But that's a good news that there is a consolidation. The second aspect of this consolidation is that sustainability becomes driven by finance. And the reason I'm saying this is that because ISSB is under the IFRS, and ISSB is sustainability-related financial disclosures. So there is a very strong focus of the new reporting that is targeting investors. And you can see this from this graph. So the more red area is the new ISSB standard. And so the quality of the data, and previous speaker mentioned this as well, will increase. It will be third-party audited. So who is managing the data in a company? Mainly by finance. Finance and accountants know how to handle a lot of data. So clearly, this is a very important role going forward. Many CFOs are now, having a double hat. when it comes to sustainability. Some CFOs are also CSOs, so there's an interesting trend here. So strategy is more and more driven by sustainability, and a very important reporting framework that will be mandated in many jurisdictions, TCFD. And when you look more closely about the framework of TCFD, you will very quickly see that it is, number one, is a forward-looking reporting. So basically, there will be a requirement to disclose a strategy on fossil fuel-related assets. So they look at transition risk, physical risk, that's one part of it. But more importantly is all the risk and opportunities will be required to be disclosed on how to handle that. It goes into the strategic planning and risk management. And it is also going to be required on what is the financial impact of those risk and opportunities on the company going forward. So this is a very financial focused world that we are going to see on how ESG is evolving. So in this respect, A4S has produced a practical guide for finance teams on net zero, because we know we have to go there. So this guide is available for every financing accountant. So I encourage you to download it. And it really looks into what is net zero. Most of us know, but the definition is there. It's about the reduction of emissions. And what is very important is along the value chain of your company. So now the responsibility of companies is no longer at the factory gate. Companies are responsible for the purchase, the procurement, and what happens to the product afterwards. And you can see this in examples of Unilever and others, who when they do their life cycle analysis, they analyze the impact of the raw material extraction and also the use of their products by the consumer. So the concept of the value chain is very important in the net zero thinking. The second part is, of course, the carbon offset. So, so why is achieving net zero important for a company? For those 5 reasons. Government and legislators are all moving towards setting legally binding targets, which have a significant impact on the private sector. Capital providers, they want to understand the financial risk and the long-term viability of your business. Organizations themselves, companies, they also look at the positive aspect of what does it mean for the competitiveness going forward when they can transition to net zero. Employees are more engaged, motivated when they work for a company that has a net zero strategy. And of course, customers and consumers look increasingly at the ESG performance of companies. When we come now to the, so you see all those countries are having those net zero commitments. They will want companies in their jurisdiction to be able to contribute to those goals. So companies will be forced at some point to look at their activities. So finance teams, they can, what's their role in company strategy when it comes to net zero? They are very good, they're the champion to track and report performance against targets, in this case, reduction targets. They should embed greenhouse gas reductions within organizational decision-making processes. Example was the CapEx, how to embed ESG and shadow carbon price, for example, in CapEx decisions, which is now very common in corporate sectors. And then thirdly is how to raise and allocate the funds needed for transition and adaptation. And the fourth one is really the CFOs should lead the interaction with the capital market. So this is almost my last slide, is how finance teams can enable the change. So in the guide I mentioned earlier, there are 4 categories. Finance teams can lead the way by identifying what are the risks and opportunities of pursuing a net zero strategy. It's about developing the finance culture. Very often the CFOs and the finance team are seen as a barrier to these projects from the CSO that drive the company towards a low carbon company. But very often, if we just look at the finance team, they will say very often, if the IRR is not good enough, then we will say no. So developing a finance culture to support the transition is very important. And then how to transform your decisions is developing an integrated management information system and look at how to embed greenhouse gas emissions into the decision. Then, of course, is measuring what matters, and we have heard NFD, TCFD, human capital, natural capital, and social capital information are important to track performance and to help make better decisions. And the last bucket is how to access finance, and we heard the previous speaker also mentioning the role of Hong Kong in ESG funds. So all this is moving very rapidly. So my point is really, in a summary, climate and other ESG-related risks are increasing. It is very important to collect and manage decision-relevant climate and ESG data, and they're becoming more complex. So we have to professionalize the data gathering that is relevant for decision-making. And hence, the finance team, the importance of the finance team into this data collection and what to do with this information is critical. So developing information management system with the data to help decisions is very important. On measuring and reporting what matters and to transform the decision to enable the company transition and change the type of activities they are involved in. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention. So I'm based in Singapore. So if anyone is interested, please contact me. Here are my contact details. And I very much look forward to hearing the other speakers of this wonderful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Constant. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Building upon our previous conversations about sustainability and ESG, let's now dive into the topic of tax transparency, a vital component that underpins effective climate action. Our next speaker will be Ms. Kate Lappin, Asia Pacific Regional Secretary, Public Services International PSI, will share with us on the topic tax transparency, an essential pillar of ESG and climate action. Kate is the Asia Pacific Regional Secretary for Public Services International, PSI. Representing workers who deliver public services, she has extensive experience in labor, feminist, and human rights movements. So, hi, Kate, are you ready? Thank you so much.
Ma'am, thank you.
We can hear you, so I'll hand over the time to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak, and to UNFPAP for bringing perhaps together an unusual partner in that unions to have a voice at this important conference. It may not be the usual ally for some of you, but I hope to make the argument around why conscientious investors should be considering the issues of tax, and particularly tax transparency in their ESG framework. Just a word, I guess, on PSI and why this is of interest to our members. So as mentioned, we represent trade unions around the world and their workers who deliver public services. And of course, the climate crisis impacts deeply on workers, and particularly on the workers who have to deliver public services, including health services, but also emergency services, water, sanitation, the services that are most impacted by the climate crisis, and the workers who have to face the onslaught of disasters, slow and immediate. But also, those workers, of course, are dependent on tax revenue, both for their employment, but also for the quality of the public services that they deliver. And workers are investors. As has been mentioned, I think about pension funds, some of the largest institutional investors in the world are pension funds of workers. And in some of those pension funds, unions sit at the board and make decisions. Which is why unions are part of the governance framework of a range of ESG standards, including the one that I will talk about today, which is part of the Global Reporting Initiative. So let me start off by saying that taxation, first of all, should be seen as a public good. Any companies that are considering themselves as ethical investors or using the ESG framework must consider tax as an absolute critical part of that. That is the main way, in addition to good labour standards, taxation is the main way that corporations can make a contribution to the societies they live in, and importantly to addressing the climate crisis. Of course, we need tax to fund our public services, but also we have a global crisis of inequality, and taxation is a core way to redress inequality. And of course, we know that societies that are deeply unequal are also not prosperous societies. They're not good societies to invest in. And that's been found by a range of economists, that a more equal society is a better environment for investors. Tax, as many of you will understand, of course, also is designed to influence behaviours. And in this case, of course, we have different taxes that should tax fossil fuels, but also can be used as tax incentives to try and encourage the greater investment into sustainability. But also at the moment, we know that fiscal policy has been underused for macroeconomic stability. We've been relying too heavily on monetary policy, and that hasn't worked efficiently, and so that we need a strong connection to tax as fiscal policy to redress the macroeconomic imbalances that much of the world is experiencing. And I have here the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we know that many have argued that there should be an 18th, and that should be taxation, because none of the goals really are achievable without strong public investment. The public is increasingly regarding tax as a critical part of corporate accountability, and is linking that tax avoidance strategies to other core corporate practice, including environmental practices. And you can see here a range of protests around the world that links those two. I also wanted to mention, as I said, we represent health workers, that we've been aligning with the Tax Justice Network globally to show what this tax avoidance really costs. And you might not instantly connect the number of nurses that have been lost because of tax avoidance to the climate. But really, the climate crisis is a health crisis. Without a properly funded health system, the climate crisis will have even more dire consequences, both in the immediate term in terms of disasters, but also in terms of the increased spread of disease and other potential pandemics. But of course, mainly we know that the climate crisis will take a lot of money. And there have been recent estimates from Bloomberg that it's close to $200 trillion that will be required, and that is only for mitigation. And And then we also have the costs of adaptation and of loss and damage. And this amount must be at least primarily funded by the state. Of course, there's a range of ways that private investors will also contribute, but many of that private investment dependent on public investment to operate, whether that be directly through public investment procurement contracts and so forth for new renewable energies, or whether it be through incentives, or whether it be through infrastructure that the public must build for the climate crisis. There is no way that this climate crisis can be addressed without a strong, robust state that can both create the signals and invest where appropriate. And of course, in terms of loss and damage and adaptation, that's primarily funded by the public. And we know right now that in addition to the standards that I'm about to cover, we have a global push to have new tax transparency standards within the UN. And we just recently have another new resolution coming from African countries that will promote a global UN tax body and a UN tax convention, which includes transparency. And so companies that get ahead of this are in a strong position to adapt as the global tax rules also adapt. And tax, I wanted to make the case, is in all parts of the ESG framework. Of course, as I said, in terms of the environment, taxes have to contribute to all of the costs of the climate crisis, but also there are a range of ways that taxes can be used, and most recently we can see a carbon adjustment mechanism coming from the EU, and no doubt other countries will be using similar mechanisms. But tax is also very important in terms of the social framework. When workers are directly employed, of course, then we have a stronger tax base, and it also is a way to pay those social contributions. And so that's a very important role of direct employment rather than the insecure employment that we see emerging in a lot of the digital economy. And of course, tax is a core part of governance, and we've heard from the accountants bodies that are increasingly looking into sustainability, but of course we think this is also a very important role for both the board and those financial officers and others who understand what is a sustainable tax policy. So let me say a little bit now about this new standard. Some of you will already be perhaps utilising the Global Reporting Initiative, the largest standards that cover a range of ESG topics. And this one in particular, which is 207, deals with tax and the importance of this as both a material reporting outcome that many companies are starting to draw on. So the first three parts, I won't go into in detail. They relate to what is your approach to tax. For example, how will you deal with things like transfer pricing, or do you have an aggressive tax policy? Where do you have a range of holdings? The second is around tax governance and risk management. So, of course, who will play a role? What role will be the board? What other mechanisms for complaints and so forth will there be? The third, around stakeholder engagement, includes the roles of companies in lobbying and understanding where they have a voice, not just directly, but in their own professional organisations they may be a part of, in lobbying governments that may undermine or advance justice. And the fourth one I want to go into a little bit more, because this is the, I think, groundbreaking component that many, not just companies, but now countries are interested in, and that's public country-by-country reporting. So public country-by-country reporting basically means that companies need to disclose all of their holdings, all of their subsidiaries, where they're paying tax and where they have workers, where they have economic activity. You can see the range of reportable items in the list. And it's important because we believe that companies should be paying tax where the workers are, where they have economic activity, where their sales are. And tax avoidance occurs when these two don't match, when holdings are in low tax jurisdictions for a range of reasons. And so public country by country reporting is not asking for more tax, it's simply asking for a transparent reporting of where taxes are paid. And this can be a really strong reporting outcome for companies that are paying tax. It shows the contribution you're making, it shows the amount of employees you have and the way that this contributes to social good. This standard, since being adopted, it was developed in 2019 and started to be a standard in 2020, is now gaining support across the world. There are some companies, I have Philips and Vodafone there, who have been using the standard. I think Vodafone even was using this standard even before it was officially adopted. If you're interested in a company's report, you can look at Philips. I think that's a decent example. But also a number of countries are interested. Europe set this kind of standard for banks after some of the tax and banking scandals, and they've had an increase in tax revenue since, only because of reporting, so that has shifted some of the tax practices. Now, the Australian government, I am in Australia, Australian government has announced that it will adopt this standard. The law has not yet been adopted, but it has made an announcement in its own budget that they intend to adopt public country by country reporting. And you'll also see that the Labor Party in the UK, currently the opposition, has started to talk about this as a standard for procurement. And this is also gaining popularity around the world, that companies who use tax havens and don't contribute to the resources we need to address the climate crisis could be precluded from any tax procurement, any public procurement. And I think that's just fair because, of course, this is public money when you have public procurement. Shareholders are also now demanding this standard for a range of reasons, both because they want to see what the risks are, particularly as this is gaining worldwide attention, but also, as I mentioned, because shareholders include pension funds, and pension funds are, of course, workers' capital. I put a few reports here from an organisation that I'm involved with called the Centre for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research, one in relation to Microsoft, one in relation to Amazon, and most recently in relation to Brookfield, a large investor. Each one has shown the use of tax havens, and each one has led to a large media attention and consequently to shareholder resolutions calling for those companies to use this standard, the GRI standard. So the previous speaker spoke of risks, of reputational risks, and I think these all show that there is reputational risk and shareholders are recognising that. And that these companies, of course, do risk divestment eventually if large institutional investors, in the case of Brookfield, that was something in the order of $3.6 trillion of institutional money backing a shareholder resolution. So I hope that has made the case for many of you to look at using this new standard as part of your ESG reporting. I encourage you to look through the GRI resources on this standard. And if you're interested, we have a range of resources really, which is designed for workers and their unions, but it may be of interest to some of you to read about what we think will fix the global corporate tax system. And we do think for corporations that are paying tax, and many of them are domestic, not multinational, that really don't use any tax avoidance strategies, we think it's in their interests because they currently face a competitive disadvantage when multinationals can use aggressive tax avoidance and local corporations or those that are strongly supportive of ESG and of addressing the climate crisis are not. So I really encourage you all to give this a priority within your own ESG framework. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Kate. And she is currently now in Australia, I've heard. Having heard from speakers from all over the world, now let's hear from our speaker from mainland China. 接下来我们邀请到深圳排放权交易所市场总监王维春先生。王维春先生为现任的深圳排放权交易所市场总监，深度的参与深圳市碳市场体系设计、深圳碳普惠平台建设课题研究、核证自愿减排量开发与交易、市场推广及对外能力建设培训等工作。今天他在线上为我们分享中国碳市场的发展、深圳和香港的机遇。我们掌声有请王维春先生，你好。
谢谢主持人，能听到吗？主持人？
听到，时间交给你了，谢谢。
好的，
I believe there's a technical problem. Maybe give him a minute or two to fix the problem. We did some testing before, and maybe he is currently in mainland, and the internet system is quite different from what we are using right now. So later on for today, we do have a couple of speakers online. So it's a very special day. They are currently in different places around the world. So I think it's really a great opportunity to being, actually what I thought is having the COVID before really gained something from it. At least we are very, we do know, or we are very used to using the Zoom system, and that is one big convenient for all of us, really. So that if we are very, very busy, even if where we were at and couldn't travel, we could still be in our other conferences and do some speaking. Okay, so there might be a little technical problem, and we will bring him back later on. Right now, let's move on to our next session. From envisioning ambitious climate goals to translating them into actionable plans, organizations often face numerous challenges in their pursuit of effective climate action. Let's explore some of these common obstacles together. So our next speaker would be Ms. Hitomi Rankine, Environmental Affairs Officer, United Nations ESG. She has over 20 years of experience in advancing research and policy advocacy for green growth and sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. She has a multidisciplinary academic background with a focus on natural sciences. So today, Ms. Hitomi Rankine will give us a sharing on common challenges in implementing climate action. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our organizers and to IMC for the nice introduction. So good morning, distinguished speakers, participants. We've had a really insightful set of presentations yesterday and this morning. We know a lot about the state of the art on climate financing and ESG now. We're really having some really important insights. I will speak about the common challenges, about the context within which we need to deliver, right? I will also look at how this informs what we must keep an eye on going forward to fine-tune our investment strategies and our ESG principles and frameworks, which are still under development and developing really, I think, in a very strong way. Okay. So this slide shows some of the work that we have done at ESG to estimate the scale of the challenge, which is one of the biggest challenges that we face, right? Our assessment indicates that the committed reductions that we need are about 1/3 of what's actually needed by 2030. And delivery on these commitments is really not sure given the current trends around consumption and around technology changes. We heard about the impact of AI on energy demand and so on. So these estimates are all very notional. Just to say that this comes from our report last year, which is being updated, right? The main point is that we need to deliver 3 or even possibly more reductions than we are currently on track to deliver right now. Okay. So you saw this slide yesterday morning. I want to repeat it because it's really important to note that we have a really important task in reversing the momentum. The dark blue area at the top is the Asia and Pacific emissions, right? We can see the steep increases, right? We can see that momentum is not on our side, right? What is behind this trend is going to be obvious to this group, right? This region is really economically dynamic, and we have an increasing concentration of the world's economic activity and consumption in this region, right? And despite the increasing wealth in the region, we still have a lot of growing to do. There's a lot of poverty still, a lot of unmet needs, right? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is our global scientific authority, tells us that even if we're able to make dramatic cuts now, it may be about 30 years before we see a difference, right? So just to say a little bit more about this progress, ESCAP produces an annual progress report on the SDGs, and SDG 13 is the only SDG which is backsliding, which is actually going in the wrong direction, right? Put these trends together, or put this trend together with the other trends. We have slow progress on all of the environmental SDGs, and especially the ones which are really critical for going forward on climate. So responsible consumption and production, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. Decent work and economic growth. We have very, very slow progress towards goals that are going to really matter. This is the context in which our financing and investment strategies need to be working and to be effective. It's an uphill task, right? The third challenge is around the political commitment, which is still emerging. So this information, which is presented here, is as of June this year, right? It should be updated for sure. But the main point is that it's showing you that the political commitment is not yet 100% there. We have a lot of pledges, a lot of interest, right? We heard also yesterday about the strong pledging of net zero commitments, right? But we need to turn these pledges into policy documents and to legislation that will give the private sector the confidence of a stable policy environment. And this work is still ongoing. It needs a lot of investment in support, especially to developing countries, as Dr. Nam said this morning, right? We really need to see drivers towards increasing political commitment. And drivers include the private sector, right? We see in Australia, for example, that it was the business that said to the government, we need more stringent reduction targets. We need to do better. So what role can this very auspicious group before us today play in increasing political ambitions is the question. Okay. Next slide. It's not just about the emissions. We need to think about what is the impact on the ground, what's driving these emissions. So let's go back down the supply chain to look at where the growth basis is. And it's about the extraction of resources. The big red area in this graph is the Asian Pacific resource extraction. You can see the dramatic increase, again, linked to economic dynamism, right? Now, the emission pathways broadly mirrors the material extraction because it's energy that is used to extract these materials and then to turn it into useful goods and services. Energy is required to do that. The less extraction we have, the lower the environmental footprint, okay? And these materials include metallic minerals and also non-metallic minerals, but also biomass, all right? The next challenge, well, the other dimension of this challenge, I think we need to dig down a little bit deeper, is that this resource use creates this significant environmental risk, right? So the International Resource Panel, this UN scientific panel that looks at resource use, points to the relationship between material use, air pollution, climate change impacts, water stress, and biodiversity, right? we can see that the Asia-Pacific consumption impact outweighs that of other regions. And the issue is also, maybe unlike the climate impacts or maybe disproportionate to the climate impacts, when these materials are extracted in this region and also transformed in this region to useful goods and services, the impacts are here. They're right in the countries in which we invest. They're right in our neighboring countries. Okay, what does this mean for the 60% of the populations in Asia and the Pacific that live in rural areas still and whose livelihoods are resource dependent, right? Even though we have a very dramatic trend towards urbanization, we need to think about the ecosystem services that are impacted by this extraction, okay? How do we bring this into our ESG terms? We need to think about really the wider impacts, right? Okay, so the next slide is about managing complexity. We heard a lot about complexity yesterday, and this slide shows an image from a foresight report that was commissioned by ESCAP in 2021, and we were looking for an image that really showed the complexity of the environment and development challenges facing the region. And this image is from a foresight report which was commissioned by the Spanish government and adapted by ESCAP, but what we found is that very little adaptation was needed, right? So what we see is that water scarcity is intimately linked to displacement and social instability, food security, climate change is really driving a lot of the negative trends. We have interconnected climate, economic, and social pressures which are created due to climate change, right? This is why we ask more and more out of the ESG systems, and we also ask more about more from the investment that we undertake. Okay. If we talk about food security alone, coming back to this slide, 1 billion people are experiencing moderate or severe food security, and 40 million climate migrants from South Asia alone are expected in 2030. So these are serious trends, right? We may not feel them in Hong Kong, but they are happening. Okay. Part of this complexity that we face is that risk is changing, and risk needs to be unpacked, right? So risk is part of our new normal, right? Part of the work that we're doing at ESCAP in examining the nexus of environment and development challenges is trying to understand what is coming up in the future better, right? We have worked with the World Food Programme to develop a risk assessment framework, and what we have seen that COVID was a game changer. So you can see that this slide shows different dimensions of food security, right? And the yellow curve is about stability. And you can see that this is the one in which risk is really increasing and has been increasing since 2010. And you may remember in 2007, 2008, there was a food price, energy price inflation, and that's the blip that you see, right? But then in 2010, there was a following crisis. And since then, instability has been a risk. And this is what you see today with the crisis emerging from the Ukraine war, which is coming together with climate impacts and other impacts in countries impacting food prices. Okay, vulnerability. Other parts of our assessment show that vulnerability has been on the increase for over a decade, right? And we see that, as I said, COVID was a game changer. The direction has changed since COVID. Okay, when we unpack this data, we see that the climate-related hazards and threats, water stress, environmental pressures are major drivers going forward. We need to understand risk a lot better. Okay. The other, I would like to switch a little bit to look at from challenges to really barriers to progress from the perspective of those who work on environment development issues within governments and directly. So a lot of the groups that we work with. So we commissioned a mini survey as a follow-up to our foresight work. And we see that the major barriers perceived are around capacity, skills, and knowledge. There was one comment about that. We really need to invest more in capacity, skills, and knowledge. But coming a close second is governance, right? we really need to think about this as the context, as an important requirement for moving forward, not only for on our environment and development programs, but really about strengthening our investment impacts, right? Public and stakeholder engagement and resources are also important, yes, but capacity and governance, yes, right? Very important. Okay. So what can we do together? What kinds of multilateral actions are going to help us move forward? So the General Assembly Resolution 76.6 looks at our common agenda and looks at the need for reinvigorated multilateralism. We're asking everyone to change what they do, the consumers, the people in households, etc. But what can we do to address global risks and challenges and find viable solutions, right? Now, existing multilateral platforms like the UN, need to engage new partners to overcome fragmentation, enhance partnership and coordination, get new ideas. We're very pleased with the insights shared at our gender investment panel yesterday evening. I'm sorry, maybe some of you missed it, but really, really important insights shared. And we need well-framed targets and effective accountability measures, right? With the right financing behind it. So how can we work together better in new ways is a big question. In March 2022, 175 nations at the UN Environment Assembly agreed to a legally binding agreement on pollution by 2024. This was a record time, and one of the reasons for this accelerated action was the fact that the private sector was right behind this idea and pushing for action. Okay, so extremely important. Okay, for ESCAP, we've been also looking at how can we look at multilateralism in a much more structured way? How can we respond to this call for reinvigorated multilateralism? So as part of our foresight work, we worked with stakeholders and got their views on priorities for this strategy, right? Now, there were 4 main priorities, so information, data sharing, transparency, and evidence for action, accountability measures, economic system and financing interventions, coordinated networking and participatory action, all extremely important, right? We have heard for yesterday and this morning the multiple ways in which this group can contribute to strengthening the work that happens across different kinds of organizations. What we need to address a bit more, I would say a lot more, is about solidarity in these actions. And solidarity meaning solidarity with the communities which are vulnerable, which become vulnerable as a result of our investments, which we can engage for better social outcomes and for creating social value from our investments. So solidarity needs to underpin our investments, and we need to recognize that a lot more in our investment strategies and our ESG platforms. Very important. Okay. So this slide was meant to really look at some actions which would support each of these dimensions of reinvigorating multilateralism. I just want to point to 2 of them. I would look at solidarity a bit more. So solidarity is not really just a concept, it needs to be operationalizing. We cannot talk about the environment without talking about the people in Asia and the Pacific, in this region in particular, right? Extremely important. And what we have seen is a tendency to separate the E from the S from the G, but in fact, they're very much intertwined, right? If you just look at the food security issue, 80% of the farmers are smallholders, right? They produce 60% of the food in the region, which is a figure which is very difficult to believe. But these livelihoods are really precarious because 2/3 of the farmland in Asia belongs to 6% of the landowners, right? We see of the transnational investments in land, 502 recorded in 2019. Half of them are for environmental purposes, right? And many of them produce land conflicts, right? We need to look at what we're planting. 9 plant species account for 2/3, right? So 9 species accounting for 2/3 of total crop production in 2014. This is not sustainable. This does not create resilience and food security. We need to think about these aspects when we talk about just transition. Really, really important for this community to contribute a bit more. And finally, when we talk about solidarity, I'll wrap it up right now. I see 0 minutes there. We need to think about solidarity with future generations as entering the ESG principles. And finally, when we think about risk, right, we need to think about the risks to communities. Our investing communities in which we invest also bear a risk, right? There's opportunity cost for receiving carbon investments. And in 2009, we saw this crisis in a province in which I worked, in which this investment failed, right? The bank failed, carbon investment was not made. The government with which I was working with lost their seat, which meant that a very progressive government was out of the political equation, and now that province, which I will not name, is on a political path from which there is no return. So there are very real risks to the community which we need to really try to think about. We're talking about investor risk, but let's talk about the risk to the communities receiving. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hitomi Rankine. Thank you for sharing with us. As we consider the global landscape of carbon markets and climate action, it is crucial to explore the significant development of China's carbon market and its potential implications for international collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen and online speakers, our next speaker, Mr. Daniel R. Fung, SBS CSC KC JP FCIR, Vice Chairman, Financial Services Development Council, FSDC, will give us a sharing on linking China carbon market to global. Mr. Fung brings extensive experience in law, academia, and public service. He has served in various influential positions and organizations, including the Basic Law Consultative Committee and the Peace and Development Foundation. Mr. Fung is the Vice Chair of the Financial Services Development Council. So, Mr. Fung, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I wish to say that FSDC, whom I represent today, is absolutely delighted to be a key collaborator in this conference, and I wish to congratulate World Green Organization for this very timely conference. And I'm very happy to work alongside ESCAP in translating aspirations into reality. Let me start off by talking a little bit about FSDC and how we fit into this general taxonomy. FSDC is a Hong Kong government think tank which brings in expertise from throughout the financial services industry, and that includes beyond financial services to supporting services like law, accounting, consultancies, and so on. And I'm very pleased to share with all of you that the proposals, the papers, the policies that we propose to the Hong Kong government to be adopted by them has enjoyed throughout our inception since 2013, and this is our 10th year of operation, a 70% acceptance rate. Now that, to my mind, is an extremely high acceptance rate, and it compares with other government think tanks that I have chaired in the past, which enjoy a acceptance rate of single digits. So I'm not going to mention names, but in terms of actual impact that FSDC proposals has on Hong Kong and the region is extremely high. Now, I also want to mention that FSDC has devoted and intends to devote an even greater proportion of time and energy to combating climate change, which is obviously the most serious challenge faced by humankind in certainly our lifetimes. And I suspect that this will continue to be the most fundamental issue facing us in the 21st century. So before I talk about the carbon markets and how we can internationalize them, I wish also to mention that within FSDC, we have focused on impact investment. We have focused on not just ESG, but also SDGs. And we have focused on the issuance of green bonds and green finance which is a critical component of our landscape now. Turning to carbon markets and how we link the biggest carbon market in the world today, which is that of the People's Republic of China, to the rest of the world. I want to share with you one statistic, one piece of data, and I promise you this is the last piece of data I will share today. According to Refinitiv, the value of globally traded carbon dioxide permits reached a record of $909 billion last year. But despite the volume of carbon permits exchanged in the world's emission markets declining by 20%, their value surged by 14% in the same year. So what does that tell us? Actually, for me, the most important lesson from these two numbers, the declining volume of carbon permits exchange, but the surging in their value means that the whole world is increasingly aware of the priceless value of a clean, green planet. Now, let me turn to People's Republic of China. We know that PRC is arguably the only remaining manufacturing superpower in the world today. And clearly, that manufacturing in mainland China has a huge impact on the global environment. Now, China has been aware of this from day one. And therefore, 15 years ago, in 2008, China set up its first experimental voluntary carbon market. That was in Tianjin in 2008, followed by another market in Beijing in 2009, followed by a third carbon market in Shanghai, 2010. Today, there are 8 different carbon markets all over China, including one in Guangzhou and one in Shenzhen, just north of our border. And Shenzhen clearly is a cutting-edge global tech hub. Now, China, beyond that, has attempted to set up a national carbon market, the CCER, which everybody knows about. Now, what is missing from that picture? What is missing is deep international connectivity. The 8 different regional carbon markets in China are all thriving. They're trading, and indeed, we understand, by way of example, the leading carbon trader in the Beijing market is scheduled to do an IPO overseas very soon. Now, why should we still be concerned? The answer is, with 8 different carbon markets, with differing standards and different rules on regulatory oversight, we see quite a fragmented picture, a very healthy picture, but still fragmented. The most important imperative for China is actually to interface with the leading global carbon markets. And those are represented by the European Union and the United States. Now, the European Union is very keen to interconnect with China, but with the 8 different fragmented markets, the challenges, as you appreciate, are multiplied. Therefore, the only solution to this fragmentation is to consolidate and to do it out of a market or a platform which the EU, for example, the US trusts. In other words, do it out of Hong Kong. And this particular policy, which I have proposed at the beginning of this year, has received the endorsement of the Hong Kong government and is supported by the central government. Why Hong Kong? the answer is obvious. I think Hong Kong, having enjoyed market experience for over a century, having enjoyed regulatory transparency, having a freely convertible currency, having, above all, a system that enjoys the rule of law with an independent judiciary, this is the obvious answer. And therefore, this is a game that is Hong Kong's to win. Our markets have served us well over the past half century, at least since 1945. And we have weathered a number of financial storms, starting with the Asian financial crisis in 1997-98, moving on to the global financial crisis precipitated by the implosion of Lehman Brothers in 2008. And today, having weathered COVID and the lockdown, we are looking to re-emerge and re-engage with the outside world. And China, I think, is well served by Hong Kong playing a role here, and that's recognized by the central government. We understand that in Hong Kong, because we have the huge privilege of enjoying one country, two systems, we also need to justify that privilege. We can't just rest on our laurels and say, well, the basic law has said it'll remain unchanged for 50 years. But what happens after 50 years? What happens in 2047? Does everything draw to a close? Well, the short answer is no. This is a subject all of us, or many of us in this room, has worked on, and I'm very pleased to say that we understand from the highest authority, that is to say, Xi Jinping's speech on the 1st of July last year, that not only has one country, two systems served China and Hong Kong well, it will continue beyond 2047. And there's a second point made in Xi Jinping's speech on 1st of July last year, which is obviously the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's reversion to Chinese sovereignty. He said, President Xi said, that one of the key components to Hong Kong's prosperity is actually the common law. This is not a statement we have previously heard highlighted by any national leader. But I think the proof of the pudding lies in the eating of it, and the track record of the common law, which has served us not just over the last 25 years or 26 years, but in fact is something that we've had since the founding of Hong Kong in 1841, 1842. That track record is something of which we are very proud. So I'd like to end on a note of collaboration and inviting every one of you in this room to work with FSDC, not just on bringing the China carbon market to integrate with the outside world, but also on various of our green initiatives. And we welcome suggestions, because we do not believe we have a monopoly on wisdom within FSDC, or even that within the financial services industry we know it all. Clearly we do not. We would welcome ideas, suggestions, proposals from other walks of life, from Hong Kong as well as from overseas. In fact, Hong Kong has been one of the most open, freest markets in the world, and we welcome that kind of collaboration from the Global South, from the European Union, from North America, and from all Belt and Road countries, because they are the ones who need to address this issue most compellingly of all. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for having me today, and I look forward to future collaboration with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fung. So now we have reconnected with our mainland speaker, Mr. Wang. Let's see if he is connected back to our main screen here. Hi， 您好，我们再次有请深圳排放权交易所市场总监王维春先生，现在交给您了，谢谢。有听到声音吗 ？Can we hear you？ 我们再试一下，我们现在还没有听到您的声音。Okay, let's see. Okay, should we give it one more try? Okay, we'll give it one more try. So before, the time is now 11:37, so we do have about 1 hour to the morning session, and then we're going to have our lunch break at about 12:35. We still have a couple of speakers. I'd like to let you know a little preview of our speakers coming up. We will have Mr. Walter van Hattum from the head of trade of the European Union office to Hong Kong and Macau. And later, we also have our speaker, Ms. Kim C. Lim, who is from East Asia and Pacific Department of the IFC. And we have one more online speaker who is also from mainland China, and she will be joining us later on before the lunch break, and she will be Ms. Huang Yu. So we will be meeting 3 more speakers, plus Mr. Wang. Hopefully, we can get him back online. Okay, we will move on to the next session before we'll get him back online later on. And now, as we consider the global efforts to combat climate change, it is crucial to address the concept of the green burden and explore the strategies necessary to overcome this challenge. So, which I have just told you earlier, Mr. Walter van Hattum, head of trade of the European Union office to Hong Kong and Macau, will be sharing an overview of the green burden, or how to succeed our climate battle. And Mr. Walter van Hattum has a background in political economy and has worked for various organizations, including the International Labour Organization, the Dutch Foreign Service, Oxfam, and the European Union. He has extensive experience in trade policy and sustainability. So welcome, Mr. Walter van Hattum. The time is yours. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for a very good conclusion. I hope I reach something similar, but if you bear with me for 10-15 minutes. The green burden, or how to succeed the climate battle. So my first point is I think we lost the climate battle. And I think the excellent presentation by Ms. Hitomi already indicated that to quite a big extent. So why are we still here talking about this? I don't know. I would like to give you an overview of what we are trying to do in the European Union, and then to see if there's still a chance to rescue some of it. Is it a burden? I think all need to contribute, and definitely it's more than compliance. When you talk about these issues also today, you see that a lot of colleagues take it from, we need to comply with legislation or rules or public opinions and stuff like that. I think actually we should go a little bit deeper when we really want to address the issues at stake. So what is the EU doing? We have an EU Green Deal. You might have heard about it. And basically what we try to do in the European Union is to completely transform the way our economy works. So we no longer count on resources for economic growth. And that's a completely mind shift and a shift of the economy. It's working to an extent. that in all sectors, you see a few sectors mentioned here, we actually try to aim for climate neutrality by 2050. We're doing not too badly. We want to be there fast, 55% reduction in 2030, and think about all sectors that have an impact on climate. The most important ones, industrial revolution. Can you think completely differently about clean technology and products? Energy savings by 40% in the near future, and the energy that we still use needs to be renewables, another 40%. We achieved a lot of this, and I think Daniel and others hinted towards that, with our emission trading system. So we actually cut already emissions by roughly 43% over the last decade or so in those industries that are considered the most polluting ones, by basically putting a price on the pollution that they use. Now, are we successful? I think the EU is doing not too badly, but the EU is responsible for 7 to 8% of global emissions. So if you're talking about a problem that is so global, you can create your own green paradise, but that will not get you there. We need actually the rest of the world to follow suit. And we try multilaterally, internationally, in all kinds of ways to convince the rest of the world to follow suit. This picture comes from the last COP27, and I think good points made also by, I think Hitomi, you made that point, that the issue of climate justice and climate solidarity were probably the two main kind of outcomes of this meeting. But apart from that, I think a lot of people were quite disillusioned. I mean, we all see the pictures around us about the incredible impact of climate change, and what do we do about it? What the EU did, we further increased our contributions that we committed to, going from 55 to 57% to even more legislation regarding automotives, agriculture, you name it, whatever sector. But we also understood that being the greenest on the planet doesn't get us there alone. So I want to cover 3 areas where I think we try to do a bit more to get people around us, including yourselves here, on board. One is trade policy. Second is looking at the production of a lot of these stuff. And 3 is finance. Now, typical picture is trade bad for the environment. I think we moved away from that picture already a long time ago. Actually, if you look at EU trade policy, we made sustainability part and parcel and core of our trade policy. I would say together with openness, we are the most open economy in the world, but also with assertiveness. So how do we do that? When we concluded almost an FTA with Japan, at the time the EU Commissioner said we are not going to sign the deal unless Japan signs up to the Paris Agreement, which they did. Similar chapters are in place with all the FTAs that we are negotiating since, and also our unilateral preferences, which we give to 70 countries or so, are now conditional towards environmental objectives. We are a strong promoter in WGO, perhaps against the odds, but we did have a fishery subsidies agreement in the last ministerial, also thanks to colleagues here in Hong Kong and China. Now, the whole philosophy of the EU is that if talking soft diplomacy doesn't help, can we use our commercial power behind some of these policy objectives? I give you 2 examples. ESG is more than environment. It's also about social and governance issues. This picture is Mongolia, where we actually were dialoguing with Mongolia the issue of child labor. The ILO has done a couple of reports, I think, with respect to jockeys, child jockeys, who are being put on a horse for racing. It's a culture, it's a tradition, it's beautiful. But during winter time, if these kids fall off the horse, they actually get very severely injured. So it's a big issue. Now, who is the EU to say you can no longer do that? It's very difficult. It's tradition. But what the outcome of a discussion could be, well, let's stop these races during winter time so that when a kid falls off the horse, it doesn't break its legs or its muscles or whatever, its skull. Secondly, can the kids wear protective clothing? Now, that's a typical outcome, I would say, where you use some of your sort of commercial power, because we put it in a debate on our trade preferences, together with some of the other issues we want to address. I also show it because it's not the sort of the silver bullet. And that brings me to another example, Myanmar. We had many discussions with Myanmar regarding our trade preferences, which provide a lot of opportunities to the industry, especially garment sector, but we didn't really like the way that the Rohingya were being treated and the state of the country. We tried many times to use our trade policy as a leverage with regard to these more political issues, and I would say here we didn't succeed. I give you those examples to show that in some cases you can use your trade agenda to pursue another agenda, but not always successfully. It's not a silver bullet. So what else can we do? If you consider it's actually not the trading that is the most polluting part of it, it's the production. So the EU is putting in place a couple of legislations that will actually look at the production processes. And I just want to mention 3 of them. One is on due diligence. So for the longest time, we actually relied on our industry, inside and outside the EU, to sort of look after these environmental issues. And of course, when you discuss, they always say, yes, we want to do that. But sort of it didn't really work out the way we wanted. So what we did now, we put in place a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, and that follows also a consultation where 70% of the business people actually responded, yes, we want to have mandatory due diligence, for 2 reasons. Our consumers and investors are asking for it, and our business wants predictability. So what they say is we rather have a more stringent set of rules than sort of being in that fluffy gray area where we don't really know what we are measured against. So we put this in place, which now obliges companies to identify, to prevent, to mitigate, and to account for negative human rights and environmental impacts in the company's operations, but also in their value chains. So we actually demand our companies to look through their whole supply chain system to make sure that we are aware of what's happening there. We're not aiming for perfection, but we want companies' chiefs to be aware of the risks. We also want business strategies to be compatible with the 1.5 degrees global warming limitation. And when you go around now, people will tell you that's no longer achievable. We still want to demand our industry to do that. These rules are mandatory. They will also impact Hong Kong and other businesses, because if you are sourcing from a place outside Europe, you'll be required to fulfill these rules. Or if you're selling to Europe, the same. Back to Mongolia, cheerful image. Just a very light example of what we try to achieve. You all might be familiar with the fantastic products coming from Mongolia, which is the cashmere wool, also produced in China. Now here you see a picture where this wonderful industry, which we support through our trade preferences, is sort of having a supply chain. Now if you look at that first picture, I think it's a goat, no? The goat is actually crucial for the production of the product. But at the same time, through overgrazing, you actually risk that you sort of do away with your own source of production. So we actually work with colleagues in Mongolia to see how can you avoid overgrazing so that this production process doesn't actually impact harmfully on the environment. A second part, what we are doing is circularity. And here I don't want to kill you with statistics, but 1 truckload of garment is going to the landfill each second. Just try to imagine that, 1 truckload each second. Will that stop? No, because consumption of garment is increasing by 63% by the year 2030. So what can we do about that? What the EU wants to do, and it's an example of what we want to do in all sectors, is circularity. Make sure when you design products, you already think about what will happen once consumers no longer use the products. Can you reuse it? Can you recycle it? Or can you use it for something else? Fast fashion, we want to bring out of fashion. We want to go back to the quality products. It might be more expensive, but maybe it gives you more value for over the longer term. A third part where we try to combine production and trade for our climate change objectives, and it's a bit of a more intrusive one, I would say, is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I explained the success of our emission trading system. We want to make sure that by actually putting a price on pollution within the European market, we are not polluting through the back door because production goes elsewhere. So this instrument, which is now in place, its first stage, will hopefully attack carbon leakage, what we call, and actually encourage industry and countries outside the EU to take similar measures. Now, the quick of it is that if you produce any of the products covered, which for the moment is cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity and hydrogen, if you produce that and you do that in a way which is sustainable, which is according to these standards, you don't need to worry about anything. If you don't, then you will need to buy certificates. Third element, finance. Very briefly, ESG, we need to mobilize private capital. In the EU, we've sort of made available around 1 trillion euros, and that sounds like a lot. And earlier on, we mentioned the commitments in COP being 100 billion. It's by far not enough. We need a lot more to actually make sure that we can get this transition going. What are we doing in the EU? Taxonomy, rules for what constitutes green finance, and actually we are expanding that to new sectors, including circular economy, biodiversity, etc. We're working with China, Hong Kong and others to see if there's a common ground. Some of you might be familiar with it. We issue green bonds, not so much to raise capital, but actually to put new standards in the market on this. And again, that's an area, and I think Daniel's very familiar with it, where Hong Kong actually is doing something similar as we do. We go a bit further. We now implement what we call the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And the short of it is that when there's a lot of meetings on ESG and companies doing their thing, everybody is doing something else. Now, what the EU is doing is putting in place a standard which is quite stringent. But what it does is, in terms of reporting, we put finance at an equal footing as sustainability. So your sustainability reporting is as important as your financial reporting. And that is quite a heavy toll to ask, but we need it. Double materiality is asked for. What's the impact you are having on the climate, and the other way around. We also want companies to have an audit of whatever they're reporting, and it will be benchmarked against common standards. So it will take away all that grey sort of stuff where you don't know what you're actually being asked to do. Again, we want to do that over the whole value chains of a company, and we want you to digitally tag the information so that others, investors, consumers, can easily track what a company is doing. Now, that should not be in isolation. So in the meantime, we also put in place rules for ESG rating providers, where again, at the moment, the environment is quite diverse, and you have a lot of different benchmarks that you are held accountable against. We are putting an end to that. We want to make these ratings transparent, comparable, with clear objectives, and that they are being supervised for independence and neutrality. Now, my last slide, I hope. Coming back to my main question, the green burden, or how to succeed our climate battle. I do hope that I show today that there is clearly a green burden, and I think we should carry that burden with pride. We are old people here in the room. I don't see any youngsters. Well, a few exceptions. For us, this doesn't matter anymore. We lost the battle, no? However, for those who come after us, maybe there's something to save. So it's not a burden, it's an opportunity, business-wise, policy-wise, and politically-wise. But we need to work together, and I think that's where the main sort of positive of my presentation comes from. If we want to succeed, we can only do that by actually being together. Now, we do that. I'm based in Hong Kong. We work closely with the Hong Kong government, with industry and other stakeholders to do that. We want to encourage investors. Hong Kong is extremely big on finance. If in Hong Kong we can change decisions to go from maybe not the best decision to the best decision when it comes to climate and environment, then actually the stake we have, the sort of financing that is available above that 1 trillion or 100 billion euros is enormous. And I think somebody mentioned the depth of the financial markets being 30 trillion, and I think a lot more is coming. Can you imagine if we can mobilize that money towards green and sustainable? That's where we can make the difference. I think Hong Kong also has a big role to play, being the 7th largest trading economy in the world, on everything that deals with due diligence and supply chains. A lot of the products we buy in the West, everywhere, actually pass through Hong Kong one way or the other. We can promote sustainability as a business model. Hong Kong is great on talent, on business. It's an opportunity, and to use that towards these challenges. I conclude by saying that it's a burden, but so is the destruction of our planet and our future generation sources of livelihood. This is why the EU wants to lead on this, and I do hope you want to lead with us to succeed our planet's climate battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Hattum. Thank you. And now we'd like to get Mr. Wang back on our screen and give it a try once again. So, can we see Mr. Wang 先生您好。
能听到吗？主持人
能听到了，我们期待着您的演讲，时间再交给您了，谢谢。
太感谢主持人再次把我介绍给各位。因为传输的问题呢，我们也就像我们的碳市场一样跌宕起伏。那最终呢，我们还是会实现最终胜利的目标。那接下来呢，我为各位分享一下我们中国碳市场的发展和深圳和香港的一个机遇。那么大家也都知道啊，联合国气候变化公约以及我们的京都议定书，以及到巴黎协定，我们经过了3层次的公约的一个遵守。那到目前为止，我们可以看到有愿景在1.5摄氏度以内的排放的额度，其实只有4000到7000万吨的样子。那可以支持我们目前全球排放量每年达到400到600亿吨，这个总量的大概10年有余。但可以想象，2摄氏度目标我们在努力之后还是可以实现的。那1.5摄氏度确实是一个愿景。那在2017年的时候，我们中国进行了一个全国碳市场的一个启动，首批纳入的是发电行业。那在此之后呢，陆续会把包括石化、化工、有色、造纸等另外的7个行业会逐步的纳入到中国碳市场的管控范围中来。那在2021年的时候，我们中国碳市场正式进行线上交易，最初的交易价格是在48块钱。那整个我们中国碳市场建设的整个历程呢，其实还是源于2009年我们国务院总理在哥本哈根气候大会时期提到的，相对于2005年我们单位碳排放的这个强度下降40%到45%。那从这一个时刻开始，我们中国碳市场开始逐步走入试点市场的一个阶段可以说分为3个阶段。第一期就是试点市场的阶段。那在2013年，包括深圳碳市场在内的几家试点进行线上交易。在2013年的6月18号，深圳正式上线交易了第一笔的这个区域的碳配额。那一度价格也是保持一个高歌猛进的一个这个程度。那到2015年的时候，国家主席习近平主席那在第一阶段发展的过程中提出了30年的下降的目标。那相比于2005年，它的下降的强度的目标设定在了60%到65%。那在同期2017年的时候，我们全国正式的对发电行业发出了这个强制履约的一个要求，构建整个全国的碳市场，从试点的初期开始走向全国的统一大市场。那在2020年，我们正式的进行了线上的一个调试，在21年的时候实现了上线的交易。随后呢，我们在碳市场发展的过程中，包括海南碳市场，其实这个海南碳市场的设立呢，主要是交易国外的 VCS 国外的合成资源减排量，包括我们现在香港的港交所目前上线的也是国际的这个合成资源减排量。那随后呢，我们也在逐步的细化碳市场。总体看起来，目前在我们中国范围内，可以用7+2+1 概括我们整个碳市场的一个数量。一呢就是我们的全国碳市场，那7呢就是我们第一阶段试点的市场。那在随后呢，包括四川和福建也相继加入了我们中国的碳市场的一个试点工作中来。从我们整个的碳市场而观之呢，那北京目前价格最高现在一度前期已经达到了100多块钱，120块钱左右都有突破的。那整个看起来，深圳呢目前纳管的标准最低，也就是说，除了电力行业以外，我们设定的3000吨，那目前所囊括的34个行业，都在不断的在拓展整个这个边界范围。还有就是广东和上海，目前是市场上比较活跃的。把广东单独拿出来看的话，它的所覆盖的行业是与我们国家碳市场是完全匹配的那么除了水泥与国家的碳市场的建材相类同，那未来也是要应对2026年正式落地的 CBAM 的一个调节机制的一个适应那看我们中国碳市场的一个发展历程，从2014年这个价格走势来看，目前还是北京价格较高。那在去年的节点的时间为止呢，深圳一直保持一个平稳发展的一个态势那还有就是未来广东和上海它的成交量级是比较大的。在国家碳市场在17年建设到21年进行线上交易以来，第一期的纳管的企业包含了2162家的发电行业，最初开盘的时候价格在48块钱，经过市场的一个整理和震荡一个选择，那基本上持平在57元到这个60元之间那么我们也看到，在第2个履约季，也就是今年作为我们全国碳市场电力行业履约的第2个履约季，它的价格最初就开始定位在60，目前已经涨到80元的这么个样子。那在第1个履约季呢，全国的碳市场累计成交总额将近105亿元，俨然已经成为全球第1大的碳市场。那所履约的总量达到了45亿吨，未来也会不断的吸纳包括7个这个未来的管控企业的这个边界和范围。那么我们中国碳市场发展过程中呢，也逐步对绿色金融方面有了一些创新和尝试。那么深圳呢，在早期已经实现碳资产质押融资，还有一些未来收益挂牌融资以及私募基金的一些创新产品的研究。那北京呢也出台了碳中和指数产品以及回购融资的一些方面的碳金融的一些动作。那上海呢，我看到今天黄钰女士也会参加此次会议，那详情她会向各位更多的介绍。广东目前呢也在设定远期交易的一个研究，那我们也是视从于全球的碳市场的一个需求。那国际上碳市场在72%以上，特别是欧盟，它都是以远期交易为主，而我们中国碳市场目前还是以现货为主。那未来与国际接轨，那势必要把整个的一个发展方向定位于全球化的一个发展。还有包括天津、湖北和重庆也做了相应的新的这种创新的研究。那就深圳而言呢，本身深圳的整个的纳管的体量还是比较少的虽然说纳管的是34个行业，未来要纳管35个行业，但整个的额度去掉了拿到国家进行履约的电力以外，目前其实整个的纳管的总量也就是2400万吨左右。但是深圳它的特色就是流动性比较好， 连续目前其实已经到今年完整的年头应该是10个年头是流动性排名第1的目前成交的累计金额呢已经达到了全国的第3累计的成交量达到第3，成交额达到了这个全国的第4。深圳还有一个特色就是拥有不限币种、不限资金量的这么个外汇投资的一个牌照，那也欢迎包括海内外各方面有意愿投资深圳碳市场的机构对于深圳的碳市场加以关注。那深圳经过10年的碳市场的探索和试行，逐步已经达到了一定的阶段性目标工业增加值增加了将近63%，那碳强度下降了42%，那真正在阶段性的实现了一个一升一降的一个初步的一个目标。那深圳呢，目前在线上交易的品种，包括区域性的配额，以及8月1号之前的国家的合同资源减排量。那未来我们也知道说，可能是会在北京的交易系统上进行新签发的减排量的一个交易。那我们深圳呢，也在碳市场深化过程中做出了新的探索和尝试。碳普惠减排量，我们目前也上线了4类挂牌有2个，那正常交易的还有2个，公共出行和共享单车。那以后为我们每个实施减碳的主体提供了一个新的渠道。在早期呢，我们深圳排放权交易所也在向碳金融创新方面做了相应的尝试，也走通了很多样板式的一个产品，包括碳债券，这个中广核的碳债券，还有绿色结构性的存款，以及家园碳基金，还有包括必批与我们妈妈电厂进行的境外回购，也为我们未来碳市场、碳金融相结合的一个活跃提供了可参考的样板。纵观起来呢，国内碳市场与国际碳市场目前所呈现的这个交易的主体交易的品种，在国内端基本上是区域性的配额，还有国家型的配额，以及地区的合同资源减排量就是碳普惠。那在国际上来讲，我们目前包括深圳排放权交易所以及海南交易所，目前也是在尝试交易国际的合同资源减排量。那香港交易所也在其中，目前已经成型。在全球的这个交易的数据来看，从早期一直到现在，这个价格是逐步的攀升，即便是这个近期有国外不利的因素的影响，那么价格像欧盟碳中心最早的一个碳中心，它的价格去年的时候我跟盘已经看到了$100以上。那短期的政治影响呢，现在收盘的情况大概是在$80多的样子还是一个持续增长的这么一个态势那还有日本东京的碳市场、强制碳市场以及韩国的碳市场。那么在全球疫情之前，韩国的碳市场也积极的与我们深圳的这个整个的碳市场呢进行一个对接，交流，充分的交流，也是想在亚太区域构建一个互相认知的这么一个碳市场的一个发展态势。那在香港大湾区呢，我们在设定的这个碳中和目标到50年碳中和目标，包括我们的临政业额特首在施政报告中也提出了香港气候行动的蓝图2050也是力争在2035年前把香港碳排放量降低到相对于2005年下降50%的一个水平。那未来呢也是想到了我们深圳与 香港的这个地缘衔接的一个优势，也是想发挥两地的一个优势互补。目前也正在积极的商讨自愿减排量的一个互联互通，以及碳普惠的一个互相互认的一个贡献。那么基于我们香港在世界金融领域的地位，以及国际贸易港的一个地位，那么也会想把碳金融相关的创新的产品，与我们内地的一个实际情况相对接，共建这个大湾区的一个市场。那服务于大湾区呢，自愿减排量市场我们也做了一些设定包括跟国际标准的一个互认，通过香港跟国际上相交流的比较多元化的一个体系。那么也是深圳也是看重能够引援国际上的一些标准以及资金，能够服务于我们内地的企业的这个低碳方面的一个服务类项。那逐步呢探索我们跨境交易的一种合作在未来也会构建包括全球能够认可的减排量的一个核定的标准。那么也想通过大湾区的区位优势，引援更多的资金，服务于全国的碳市场。那我就介绍这些，谢谢。
谢谢，非常感谢精彩的分享，谢谢王先生。Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. Building upon our previous topics, let's now zoom in on to the East Asia and Pacific region and explore how blended finance solutions are driving sustainable development and catalyzing climate projects in this dynamic and diverse area. Now, please welcome our next speaker, Ms. Kim C. Lim, Regional Director, East Asia and Pacific Department, IFC, to give us a sharing on sustainable development in East Asia and Pacific, blended finance solutions for climate projects. Ms. Kim C. Lim is the Regional Director for East Asia and the Pacific at IFC, a member of the World Bank Group. She oversees the implementation of the region's strategy, investment, and advisory business. IFC has a $13 billion portfolio in the region. So let's put our hands together once again for Ms. Kim C. Lim.
Thank you. Hello and good morning, everyone. I wanted to first thank the World Green Organization for hosting this wonderful conference today and for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here today, and welcome. My name is Kim C. Lim. I'm the Regional Director for East Asia and Pacific at the International Finance Corporation, or the IFC. We are the largest development finance institution focused on financing the private sector in emerging markets globally. And economic growth here in East Asia and the Pacific has lifted millions of people out of poverty over the last few decades. Yet, the current overlapping crisis in the world threatens to reverse some of these hard-earned development goals and reverse what we have achieved in the past few decades, pushing many millions of people back into poverty. This region requires trillions of dollars, as you may have heard from the other speakers, to achieve the net zero goals of the region by 2050. And we all know that the capital is not flowing to projects where it's needed. So what can we do? Blended finance has potential to help this region unlock that capital and attract that capital to projects and sectors where it's needed the most. And these are projects that are bankable in the long run, but in the short term are not commercially viable because the risk-adjusted returns are inadequate for commercial capital. So at the IFC, we've been using blended finance for the past 20 years to help mobilize private capital to projects in these higher risk environments. And we do so by blending commercial funds with concessional funds to help tilt that risk-adjusted return to a level that will be attractive enough for commercial investors to invest in these projects that have high development outcomes for that country or for that sector. So what are projects that are candidates for blended finance? If we can think of the investment spectrum that you see on the slide here, where on your left-hand side are projects that require full subsidies. These are projects that are typically funded by the private sector. And on your right-hand side are projects that are fully commercial. And these are projects where private investors will willingly invest because the commercial returns meet their hurdle rates of return. In the middle is the sweet spot where we apply blended finance, because these are projects that require a little nudge, a temporary subsidy to help these projects reach commercial viability. And I'll go into the reasons as to why some of these projects, and give you some examples as to why some of these projects will require that temporary subsidy. So at the IFC, we are one of the largest implementers of blended concessional finance, where we manage about $7 billion globally of blended finance and continue to fundraise for climate projects, but also other agendas that will help the world towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. We raise blended finance from a number of sources, such as governments, development partners, as well as philanthropic sources. And we, aside from climate, we also raise blended finance from these sources for gender, food security, health, SMEs, which is part of our inclusion agenda, and also recently for supporting of refugees that have been displaced through the various conflicts around the world. Some examples of blended finance facilities that we deploy quite a bit to help the climate agenda is the Canada IFC Blended Finance Program that is set up to mobilize private capital for global climate actions. And this reflects the Canadian government's commitments to the 2015 Paris Paris Agreement to support developing countries in their transition to lower carbon economies. We also have the Finland IFC Blended Finance Program for climate, in which Finland co-invests alongside IFC in climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. And this program covers a multitude of sectors such as renewable energy, energy efficiency initiatives, green buildings, smart climate agriculture, forestry, and a few others. And finally, we also have the UK IFC Market Accelerator for Green Construction Program, or MAGIC. And these funds are deployed through specific lending programs with financial intermediaries, and with the objective to incentivize the adoption and acceleration of green buildings through the certification program that IFC provides, which is called the EDGE Green Buildings Program. So a little bit about our impact and how we deploy blended finance. The impact of our blended finance program has been quite significant in terms of attracting private capital. So as of June of this year, which is the end of our fiscal year, we supported 475 projects in 55 countries. With $4.6 billion of concessional funding, we leveraged $24 billion of financing. 14 billion of that was from IFC's own account, and 10 billion was from third parties that co-invested with us. So that leverage factor is about 1 to 5. But when we disaggregate that and just look at the climate portion of the projects that we financed, that leverage ratio increases to 1 to 10. So double the amount of mobilization for climate versus the overall mobilization for climate and other agendas that we just talked about. So how can we deploy blended finance, and how can blended finance help your projects? So as I mentioned before, we use blended finance to adjust the risk-return profile of projects. And some examples of risks that might be too high or perceived to be too high for commercial investors could include macro risks, such as uncertainty of political environment, uncertainty of legal regulations and enforceability of contracts, or maybe even some technologies that are not yet proven at scale in that particular sector or that particular country. In circumstances like this, we could use a blended finance tranche to take the first loss or a subordinated position such that it allows the commercial capital to then enjoy a lower risk of being invested in that project. We can also use blended finance for guarantees to either provide a credit enhancement or to, again, alter that risk-return profile in order for private capital to be comfortable making those investments. Other situations could be also certain projects that require funding upfront, like greenfield projects where significant amounts of capital needs to be invested upfront, and commercial capital may not necessarily want to take that greenfield or construction risk. So in situations like this, we can front-load that disbursement using blended finance capital. So the blended finance capital goes in before the commercial capital, and the blended finance capital is the one that's taking the construction and greenfield risk. And the commercial capital then comes in when the project is already de-risked. So these are just some examples of construction as well as structuring risks, but there can also be financial-related risks, such as hedging in many markets, especially US or euro-dollar investments. Euro-dollar denominated investors may require hedging to neutralize the foreign exchange position. And in many of the emerging markets, such hedging tools are not widely available. We could use local currency hedging products out of what we call the IDA PSW pool of blended finance that we have available to us to provide these hedging or to neutralize this foreign exchange risk to commercial capital. So in this slide, it's pretty much what I outlined of how we use blended finance, but from an instruments perspective. So we talked about local currency loans and subordinated tranches, and that could be in the form of a mezzanine tranche that we put in. It could be subordination. It could be strengthening the collateral package. So it could be providing a first loss. So in the event that collateral is not available or not enforceable, there is a first loss tranche that takes care of that risk before the commercial capital comes in. Now, how do we deploy and what rules and what principles do we apply to blended finance? So IFC applies blended finance in accordance with the principles of the Development Finance Institution Working Group on blended finance. And such rules are necessary so that we do not create market distortions and ensure that the scarce concessional capital that we have is put to the maximum use and we can achieve the maximum impact from this scarce pool of resources that we have. So the number one principle is we deploy blended finance to ensure we crowd in and not crowd out private capital, because it's easy to distort the market by providing concessional capital such that the private capital is then displaced. And that is not the use of blended finance, and that is not how we would encourage blended finance to be used. So we apply the concept of minimum concessionality, meaning we put just the right amount of blended finance to tilt that risk-reward balance in order for commercial capital to reach its minimum hurdle rates. So I'll finish with one example of a blended finance project that we implemented in Vietnam. And it's a waste-to-energy project in the Bac Ninh province in Vietnam, where IFC provided $30 million of financing, which was split into 2 tranches pari passu, one from the own account and one from a blended finance facility that we manage. And the project was to generate income from tipping fees of at least $15.6 per ton of municipal waste and $80 per ton of solid waste, and in total reducing 79,000 tons of GHGs per year. The blended finance tranche was also tagged to a weaker credit of the guarantee tranche, meaning the blended finance tranche will pay out before the commercial capital, the blended finance tranche will take a secondary position on the guarantee, meaning it will come in second if there was an event that would trigger a guarantee. So the commercial capital gets the guarantee first, and then the blended finance will get it afterwards. So ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your kind attention, and with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kim Si-lin. Thank you. As we delve deeper into the realm of carbon markets, it's essential to examine the national carbon market construction and development trends in China, gaining insights into the strategies and future direction of this pivotal environmental initiative. The following sharing will be conducted in Mandarin. 接下来我们邀请到上海环境能源交易所交易运营中心副主任黄钰女士。黄钰女士2011年加入上海环境能源交易所，负责上海碳市场交易日常运营和管理和碳金融产品开发。今天她在线上为我们分享全国碳市场建设及发展趋势。有请黄钰女士。
非常感谢主办方的邀请，今天有这个机会给大家分享一下目前我国全国碳市场，包括我们上海区碳市场的建设情况。我们知道我们上海环境能源交易所呢，首先我先介绍一下我们上海环境能源交易所。我们是08年8月5日成立的，那目前呢我们是有11家股东单位，我们是一个股份制的有限公司，也是中国大陆成立时间最早、交易规模最大、服务功能最齐全的一个碳交易机构。那目前呢我们主要是承担了4方面的功能，一个是全国碳配额，简称为 CA 交易平台及全国交易系统建设、运行管理单位。第二个是上海市政府指定的碳排放交易平台，包括我们目前上线的上海碳排放配额 SHEA， 以及明年即将上线的上海碳普惠等等自然减排产品。那第三个是我们还是国家碳交易主管部门备案的核证减排量 CCR 交易平台。那第四个呢，我们也是国家碳交易主管部门批准设立的全国碳市场能力建设中心。那我们交易所目前呢，主要是围绕着5大业务来开展，那服务好我们的整个国家的一个双碳目标的一个实现。那第一个是碳市场交易平台，这个是我们的基础。那目前呢，我们主要是交易的有4大类型。第一个是碳排放交易，那碳排放交易呢，目前又分为2个品种，一个是全国的，一个是地方的。还有碳减排量，主要是 CCR， 还有就是碳衍生品交易，主要是以上海碳配额为基础的上海碳配额软期，还有碳普惠交易。那这个产品的话，预计是明年上半年会启动上线。那第二个是我们是碳金融创新平台。我们是依托我们目前的区域的碳现货为基础，我们开发了一系列的来服务好支撑我们整个碳场发展的碳交易产品，包括碳金融产品，包括还有另外呢， 我们在整个过程中呢，也做了一系列的碳金融创新，而且我们还支持我们浦东新区建立气候投融资平台。那第3个是碳管理服务平台，也是我们比较核心的一个平台。我们是联合其他的一些技术支撑机构，发了全球首个碳管理体系标准应用。目前呢，在长三角地区应用的比较广泛。那第4个是能力建设和培训。那我们呢是包括碳能力建设。第2个是碳培训教育，还有碳文化的发展，主要围绕着这个3个方面来开展一系列的碳能力建设。第4个是碳中和服务平台，那我们也是根据整体的一个推进来开展一些低碳认证啊，包括碳中和行动联盟啊，包括碳咨询等等一系列的跟碳中和相关的一些咨询服务。那我们中国碳市场建设的历程呢，我们知道，那目前主要是在国家主管部门的倡导下，我们希望利用这种市场化的资质，市场化的这种性质来优化我们的整个资源配置，而且的话也希望这种碳市场的这种市场化的机制呢，在资源要素配置中发挥决定性的作用。那其实呢，我们国家一直以来呢，包括从“十二五”规划以来，一直是高度重视以碳市场这种市场化的机制来促进低碳减排，包括促进绿色低碳的一个发展。那从总体来说呢，中国碳市场总体构成呢，目前呢，主要是配偶市场，包括减排市场。那配偶市场的话，主要是中国大陆的碳配额交易市场，那还有8个区域性的一个碳市场。那减排市场呢，主要是 CCI 市场，包括各个地方目前兴起的区域碳普惠市场。那从发展的历程来说的话，其实我们很早就开始启动了碳市场的这个筹备工作。那最早可以追溯到2011年，当时主管部门还是国家发改委，开启了7+1的一个地方碳试点建设。那在2013到2014年的时候，各个试点根据国家的安排，开始陆续启动上线交易。那在2015年的时候呢，我们又上线了 CCI 交易。在2021年7月16号呢，我们又上线了全国统一的一个碳市场，就是全国碳排放配额市场，那正式上线启动交易。那目前呢，已经成为全球覆盖排放规模最大的一个碳市场。我们整个全国碳场的总体交易情况是，我们是2021年7月16号正式启动上线交易的。那目前覆盖范围主要是发电行业，目前共有2200多家企业，年覆盖约50亿吨二氧化碳。那未来的话，未来根据国家的安排，我们要纳入8大行业，除了发电行业之外的话，还有建材、钢铁、有色、石化、化工、造纸和民航。未来的话，会根据国家的一个总体的安排，根据稳中求进、先易后难的循序渐进的原则，逐步将其他的7大行业纳入到整个全国碳市场体系。那目前呢，从市场结构来说，我们全国碳市场的管理部门是生态环境部。那我们上海环交所呢，主要负责配额的一个集中统一交易。那全国碳市场的架构的话，目前是主要是有两个大的系统做支撑。那主管部门是我们生态环境部，2个支撑机构负责建立2个支撑系统，2个支撑机构，全国碳排放船交易机构、全国碳排放船注册登记机构。而且的话，目前的话，只有重点排放单，根据我们的管理办法是重点排放单位、机构和个人都可以参加。但是目前的话，现阶段只有重点排放单位，也就是我们纳入的企业才能够参与我们全国碳市场。那我们的全国碳市场交易系统呢，主要负责全国目前全国唯一的集中交易平台，备集所有的交易指令，统一配对成交。那全国注册登记系统呢，主要负责跟我们交易系统对接，还有跟结算银行对接，根据我们交易系统的成交结果开展清算和交收。那交易主体的话，目前还是以重点排放单位为主的一个交易主体，主要是通过我们交易系统来开展交易系统提供的交易客户单参与全国碳市场交易。目前的话，无论是从注册登记还是交易，还是最终的履约，我们全都是线上化的。目前的话，交易主体主要是 重点排放单位，未来的话可能会根据国家的一个安排，尤其要符合国家有关交易规则的机构和个人，可能在未来会引入。交易产品的话，目前主要是全国碳排放配额，简称为 CA。未来的话，也将根据国家有关规定，实时增加其他的交易产品。那目前交易方式呢，我们没有场外交易，我们全部是场内交易。那场内交易的话，主要是协议转让和单项竞价。那协议转让呢，主要是包括2个方面，一个是挂牌协议交易，第二个是大宗协议交易。那交易时间的话，我们挂牌协议交易是上午9点半到下午11点半。那上午9点半到11点半，下午呢是1点到3点。大宗交易的话，1点到下午1点到3点。单项竞价的话，目前的话，如果是举行的话，我们交易所会另行公告。那还有我们也实行最小的交易单元，包括数量，最小的数量呢就是1吨，价格呢最小的变动单位是0.01元。那我们挂牌协议交易的涨跌幅是正负10%，大宗的是正负30%。截止到从2021年7月16号到2023年10月16号这期间呢，我们共有544个交易日，大概累计成交量是3.2亿吨，那我们的累计成交额是163.44亿元，我们的收盘价是在41到82块钱之间波动。目前的话，我们全国碳市场主要还是以碳现货为主，这点跟欧盟碳市场有很大的区别。欧盟的话主要是以碳衍生品为主。这是我们整个全国碳市场从启动到目前的一个价格走势图，大家可以看到，那目前呢相对而言来说，市场运行健康有序，交易价格呢稳中有升。那基本上也符合目前的整个政策导向，那也促进了企业减排，温室气体减排，同时也加快了低碳转型的一个作用，也初步显现。那也符合我们目前现阶段的一个基本的碳达峰的一个要求。而且同时，目前的整个市场还是以履约为目的的市场。全国碳市场的进展的话，主要是3个方面，一个是推动了绿色低碳转型和高质量的发展，第二个是降低了发电行业的减排成本，因为我们首期纳入的行业主要是发电行业。第3个是提升了企业减排意识和能力，那让更多的企业来提升了自己的这种碳管理能力，包括控碳的能力等等。第3个方面是就给大家分享上海碳市场。那我们上海碳市场启动相对而言比较早，我们是在13年11月26号启动。那马上的话，我们是上海碳市场启动10周年。那我们是出了配套的相对完善的政策体系框架。那上海碳市场的运行的经验，以为后来我们全国碳市场落地上海也打了很好的基础。那我们有从主管部门的层面，我们出了管理办法，还有配套的方案，包括核算指南，包括核查规则，还有我们交易所层面呢出了交易规则1+6的交易规则。那目前呢，我们是纳入了28个行业，基本上上海的整个工业全部覆盖了，而且的话，我们也是还纳入了航空、港口、水运，也是目前国内唯一将水运纳入到碳市场的一个区域性的碳市场。同时呢，我们也纳入了建筑行业。那今年的话呢，我们还纳入了数据中心。那基本上我们的话，我们从大的角度分为工业行业和非工业行业。那工业行业的话，年排放在2万吨可以纳入到我们这个碳市场体系，非工业行业呢纳入是1万吨可以纳入我们这个体系。目前的话，我们有350多家纳入到整个上海碳市场体系。那我们配额分配呢，我们是最早是采用历史排放法和历史强度法，那后来呢，我们在整个运行过程中不断的去优化我们的整个配额分配方法。那现在我们是基于采用历史排放法，包括历史强度法，还有基准线法，基本上70%以上是采用基准线法，还有部分有偿。我们今天刚刚上午刚刚结束了一场有偿发放。还有就是说，而且的话，我们也是中国大陆首个企业层面核算和核查规则，我们还颁发了。而且的话，我们最早是从 可以追溯到2011年，我们就开始启动了历史数据的一个盘查工作。那交易体系的话，我们也是也是这点有点类似，我们采用挂牌交易，包括协议转让，协议转让就是大宗。我们的挂牌交易是10万吨以下，我们必须要挂牌；10万吨及其以上，我们也要做协议转让。我们挂牌的涨跌幅是正负10%，协议转让的话正负30%，正负30%。那目前的话，我们主要现货品种是上海碳排放配额，简称为 SHEA 加 CCR。那目前的话，我们的这个参与主体比较丰富多样，除了我们纳入的这个企业之外，我们还有各种类型的机构投资者，都是我们比较核心的这个交易主体。那我们目前呢有3个支撑系统，这个全国碳市场也是一样的，有数据报送系统、交易系统和登记系统。那截止到10月16号的时候，上海碳市场所有的现货品种累计成交量约为2.23亿吨，累计成交额约34亿元。那目前呢，无论是成交规模位居各个试点的前列。那我们目前吸引了将近1700多家企业参与交易，那其中呢，机构投资者占了70%，那也是目前几个试点里面唯一连续9年实现企业履约率100%的一个试点地区。那总体来说的话，我们市场运行有序，配额价格稳中有升。那我们CCI的交易量基本上占了全国几个试点的40%左右，那而且长期位居首位。还有就是说，这也跟我们整个交易机制的设计有很大关系。我们整个交易机制，因为 CCI 的话，它是根据项目的来的，我们在交易设计过程中也是考虑了这一点。相对于其他的试点来说，我们的整个交易机制相对而言比较灵活。那还有机构投资者呢，在我们整个市场过程中，从交易规模来说，占比是超过了2/3。所以说，机构投资者整个市场的活跃度提升还有很大的促进作用的。还有碳金融的话，碳金融创新这一块，我们是从是我们的出碳市场启动之初，我们就开始开展了一系列的碳金融创新。比如说，我们也是充分依托了我们上海国际金融中心的一个优势。我们与金融机构包括本市、包括上海市的各类要素平台合作及探索各类的发展碳金融，也是希望能够给我们纳管企业跟我们的服务经济来提供更多的这种碳资产管理工具，更好的呢来服务我们实体企业向绿色低碳的一个转型。那比如说像我们碳资产融资类的，我们除了 CCR 质押，包括碳配额质押。那投资类的呢，我们推出了绿色指数，包括碳基金、碳信托。那碳资产管理类呢，我们推出了碳北购，包括碳借碳。还有风险管理类的，我们跟上海清算所配了上海碳配额软期。那这个产品是目前我们国内唯一一个标准化的场外衍生品。而且的话，是采用中 CCP 的模式来进行清算的。还有就是说，我们也是试点，也是第一支碳基金，包括第一支碳信托产品，包括第一笔 CCR， 包括第一个全国的碳配额软期产品，包括第一笔碳配额和 CCI 组合质押贷款，还有第一笔保险产品，还有碳中和主题指数等等。那都是由我们上海碳市场来开创的。那还有另外一个体系就是碳配体系。那目前我们正在建设上海碳配体系。那我们知道前面的无论是配额市场还是 CCI 市场呢，是相对于高排放或者说中大规模的这种减排项目。那碳普惠呢体系主要是针对小微的或者公众的这种减排行为。我们也是通过一定的方法学，包括场景的设计，将企业与公众的这种减排行为进行一个量化记录，并通过转让注销或者政策支持，还有引入交易、商业奖励等等这种销售模式，销售渠道来实现其价值。最终目的呢，还是引导社会形成绿色生产生活的方式。其实的话，碳普惠本质上是一种生态价值的一个创新方式。那我们碳普惠呢，目前设计的主要是包括2方面，一个是项目减排，第二个是包括公众减排。那项目减排的核心目的呢，主要是激励中小企业的这种碳减排行为。那公众减排呢，主要是希望通过这种机制呢，来引导社会大众来参与这种减排行动。 那其实从另外一个角度呢来讲的话，我们碳汇也是强制碳市场的重要补充，因为我们也把碳汇引入到这个履约机制，也可以用于履约抵消。这是我们上海碳汇整个设计的一个基本的框架。那我们也希望通过这种机制的设计，来引导全社会形成绿色生产和生活方式。还有就是说，上海碳试点交易特点与成效。那我们可以从一个是我们3个率先发布了中国大陆首个碳排放交易管理办法，那率先建立了完善的企业碳排放核散与核查管理体系，率先纳入了航空企业，而且全球最先纳入水润企业。那还有就是说，我们还取得了一定的成效，也说我们推动了碳交易制度体系的探索，在整个过程中，我们也是不断的优化我们的配额分配机制，使我们的配额机制呢来适应整个减碳减排的一个需求。第二个是我们是高度重视规则制度的建设，包括整个市场化的以及机制的引入，那而且是率先推出了1+6的规则体系来支撑整个碳市场的一个运行，而且也是确保从规则体系的角度，从监管的角度来确保市场参与主体的合法传译。那第三个是我们也是在整个过程中呢，我们发现我们的企业通过碳市场的这种机制的建设和运行呢，那企业的这种减排意识也得到逐步提升。那我们从整体的排放得到了有效的控制。那第5个是我们在整个过程中也培育了和促进了碳关联产业的一个发展。那第6个就是我们在整个过程中也探索碳金融，推出了一系列碳金融工具，也希望引导更多的资金能够投入到我们绿色低碳领域。那我今天就分享到此，谢谢大家。
谢谢王玉女士，非常的感谢。So this brings us to our lunch break. And our afternoon session will begin at 2:30 p.m. And at 2 p.m., our registration desk will be ready for you. So we will see you all again at 2 p.m. Register back into our venue here. See you all later. Thank you.